Chapter 29. The polar night was good news for some polar animals because it meant more hunting opportunities. However, it was bad news for some polar animals because they were the prey, animals that flew in the sky, such as the Arctic owl, the Arctic falcon, and the vulture, belonged to a group of birds of prey with good night vision. They could live in the polar night like fish in water. In contrast, the Arctic reindeer had limited night vision and were easy prey for other Arctic carnivores. As for the polar bears that stood at the top of the polar food chain, whether it was day or night, it seemed to have no effect on them, except for some polar bears that had problems all over their bodies, such as Elishanda, who had received a lot of attention. No one would have thought that he would be afraid of the dark. A polar bear that was afraid of the dark was experiencing the polar night. Hashtag the polar night is here. We can't take photos of AO Daisai and the cute Elishanda hashtag on the Polar Enthusiast Forum. People were celebrating the arrival of the polar night while discussing regretfully. It was a pity that they couldn't continue to track the whereabouts of the animals and their cute figures. Not only AO Daisai and Elishanda, but also other animals. In terms of popularity, AO Daisai and Elishanda were indeed the most popular animals at the moment. They first gained a group of fans on the forum. Liking was spreading and contagious. This group of fans was very active in reposting the stories and photos of AO Daisai and Elishanda on other platforms, helping the two cute polar bears to accumulate more fans. After a summer of fermenting, AO Daisai and Elishanda had a faint tendency to become the spokesperson bears of the Arctic. People with lofty ideals who paid attention to the polar environment were very happy and excited. These two polar bears had attracted the attention of people from all over the world. They hoped that AO Daisai and Elishanda would become more famous. Let more people be willing to learn about polar bears and the polar environment. Let more people work together for these cute little lives and encourage themselves to do one more small thing to contribute to the environmental protection work every day. In fact, the volunteers who actively promoted AO Daisai and Elishanda were very worried. Oh, if this continued, people all over the world impression of polar bears would stop at white, fat, and clean. Look at Elishanda's mental appearance. How did she look like she had suffered a little? She was obviously rounder than the pets at home. Hashtag about the possibility of Elishanda's weight loss business. Hashtag, here's the thing. I'm a university professor who regularly publishes articles about the North Pole. In the past few days, I've posted 2 articles about Otis and Alexander. I've also posted 2 photos of the cute animals. Then, someone left a comment saying that the 2 polar bears made them feel better about life in the North Pole. Me too. I'm Norwegian. My personal social media account has people leaving comments every day saying that these 2 polar bears are too good-looking. Are they reared in captivity by our country? They say that our country is really rich. AO Daisai and Elishanda are polar bears born in Greenland. I knew there would be this problem. Elishanda looks like he's living a better life than I am. Letting him be the ambassador will really make people think that polar bears are living a good life. It's not his fault. Anyone who sees a white, fat little animal will guess that it's living a good life. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem is that a dirty and skinny polar bear can't be out of the circle. Laugh and cry. Only a likable one like Elishanda can be out of the circle. But if we push him out, it's too easy to create the illusion that life in the Arctic is very good. Spread your hands. Whose fault is this? AO Daisai's fault. Well, it's not really his fault. I hope that all the mothers in the world are half as good at raising cubs as he is. AO Daisai, a male mother who makes all the female polar bears feel ashamed. So how's the discussion going? How's it going? If Elishanda loses 1 or 2 pounds of weight, AO Daisai will enter your room tonight and kill you. If you want Elishanda to lose weight, you have to step over AO Daisai's corpse. It should be said that AO Daisai doesn't want little bear to come out of the circle at all. Even from a human's point of view, I can understand it quite well. Who wants their baby to be watched by so many people every day? So this topic seems to have no other use except to prove that AO Daisai is watching the little polar bear very closely. Look, even people on the forum know that AO Daisai is watching little bear very closely. He even occasionally picks up Goldie to make Little Bear look like a mother who hides her child's toys when he doesn't eat. It's full of love. As the person involved, Xiao Qixi didn't feel the restraint and unhappiness of being controlled. On the contrary, because the sky has been too dark recently, he likes to stick close to Ao Daisai. Of course, the other party doesn't dislike him. After staying in the bay for a few days, Xiao Qixi, who felt that he couldn't do it, finally adapted to the polar night. Or rather, he got used to the night in the bay. Once he was familiar with it, he wouldn't be afraid. Coincidentally, there are a lot of fish in the water. There are gray trout, smelt, and cod, all of which are the favorite food of polar bears. Under the cover of the night, these fish that usually hide in the depths of the sea finally come out. Although Xiao Qixi's whaling skills aren't very good, he's good at catching fish. He's the kind of bear that won't starve to death even if he lives alone. The night sky is bright, magnificent, and pleasant. No matter how you take a screenshot, it's like an eye-catching picture scroll, proving that the polar night sky isn't dark. Xiao Qixi is afraid because the sea is always shrouded in a cloud of fog that can't be dispersed. It's hazy and strange. Coupled with the sound of the sea, he can't see the end of his surroundings. It's like a scene from a horror movie, so he's afraid. But now that he's familiar with it, he dares to leave Ao Daisai's side and swim further into the sea to catch fish. A delicious smelt was held in the little polar bear's mouth. He happily floated to the surface of the water and swam to a nearby reef to lie down and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Tilting his head and eating halfway, Xiao Qixi, who has sharp eyes, saw a white bear's head swimming over in the distance. His first reaction was Ao Daisai, and then he spat out the remaining half of the fish. He wanted to leave the tail for Ao Daisai to eat. But soon, Xiao Qixi realized that something is wrong. Ao Daisai should be in the water behind. It's impossible for him to come from this direction, so this polar bear isn't Ao Daisai. Little Bear, who has studied Sun Tzu's Art of War, immediately picked up half of the fish, turned around, and plunged into the sea to find his boss. As long as he swims fast enough, danger can't catch up with him. On the dark and foggy surface of the sea, Ao Daisai floated up with a splash. He was holding a fish that was still flapping its tail in his mouth. He was about to look for Little Bear when he felt a meat catapult into his arms, and he hugged it tightly. He looked down and saw a familiar yellow bucket. A wet little bear with half a fish in its mouth was the one he was looking for. Ao Daisai narrowed his eyes. Before he could feed Little Bear, he noticed a strange intruder swimming in the distance. Obviously, another polar bear has taken a fancy to this good place to catch fish. Before the other party got close, Ao Daisai swam to the shore with Little Bear in his arms. If he was looking for food alone, he wouldn't mind sharing this bay with another polar bear or fighting to drive the other party away. But at this moment, he is not alone. Ever since Ao Daisai had the little bear by his side, the number of times he fought has plummeted. Unless it was necessary, he would show his fangs to solve the problem. If not, he would just leave with Xiao Qixi. They went ashore on another reef. The sea breeze made Yulashanda squint his eyes. Xiao Qixi raised her two little bear paws to show her approval for Otis to carry her and run away whenever there was a conflict. They were all endangered animals, so there was no need for them to fight and kill each other. They would only be able to eat more fish if they were friendly. If they can't stay in this sea, they will go to the neighboring sea. Xiao Qixi hugged the fishtail and raised her head to lick the water droplets on Ao Daisai's eyelashes. As long as she was with Ao Daisai, she could go anywhere. Oh, I almost forgot. The little polar bear shyly gave the remaining half of the fish to Ao Daisai. Although it was only half, it was still very rare. If he hadn't remembered it early, there wouldn't even be half of it left. The problem was that Ao Daisai ate the half of the fish he gave, but gave him the one he had just caught. Xiao Qixi felt that she had profited no matter how she looked at it. When the little bear finished eating, Ao Daisai dived into the sea with Little Bear again and swam to another sea. In other words, Xiao Qixi was going to leave the environment she was familiar with and go to a new environment. A new environment. Who knows what will be in the new environment? Unfamiliar scenery appeared one after another. The little polar bear's fat legs began to tremble, and its heart began to pound. It didn't even know where to look. It wouldn't be good if it saw something scary. After swimming in the water for a while, they successfully went ashore. They shook off the seawater on the beach. It seemed that the next journey was land. Walking at night, Xiao Qishi didn't say anything and stuck close to Ao Daisai. Xiao Qishi was familiar with the night lights of human gathering places. It might still take some time to get used to the night in the wilderness. Ao Daisai protected the shivering little bear by his side and leaned closer to his face. His face was close to Xiao Qishi's face, and he sniffed as if to make sure that there was nothing wrong with the other party. Only then did he start to concentrate on walking. Ao Daisai's goal was quite clear. He wanted to find the next place where they could catch food as soon as possible and try to maintain enough food before winter came. The stars sparkled as they walked together on the road. Except for the occasional animal cries and the sound of waves, everything was silent. This was a rather different experience. The little polar bear slowly calmed down and walked forward step by step. He felt that he had integrated into the world. During the time when he came to work in the Arctic, he didn't feel that he belonged to this land. It was as if it was just a transition period in his life. In his spare time at work, he would also go around to enjoy the beautiful scenery. Yes, enjoying it was like admiring other people's things with the eyes of a guest. But now it seemed different. The Arctic was no longer a transition, but a home to live in. Although the night in this home was a bit scary. Xiao Qishi felt that the atmosphere was too quiet and the journey was too boring. He decided to chat with Ao Daisai. He, the silent cool brother, was he willing to talk to him? Roar. Ao Daisai was really willing to accompany him and quickly responded in a low voice. His voice was still so deep. If there was a distinction to be made, Xiao Qishi felt that his voice was a little boy's and Ao Daisai's was a domineering voice. Listening to him, his fat legs softened. Of course, it wasn't because he thought the wrong way, but because he was tired. Ao. The little polar bear yawned and made a sleepy sound, and the corners of his eyes were wet. Within 10 minutes, Ao Daisai found a suitable place to sleep. He used his huge body to block the only wind outlet and let the little bear stay in a semi-sealed position so that he could sleep more peacefully. As for the small yellow bucket, it was left alone outside. A little bear's head came out and rested his chin on Ao Daisai's arm, admiring the stars in the sky. It was a benefit for himself before going to bed. There were too many stories about the stars. It would be great if he could tell Ao Daisai some stories. The ignorant polar bears only knew how to eat and sleep, so they probably hadn't heard so many wonderful and interesting stories. Of course, polar bears probably didn't care about this. They were probably more interested in human food, big sausages, canned fruit, small biscuits smacking his lips. Should he go to the cabin again next year? Lying on his stomach, the little bear fell asleep. Ao Daisai raised his head and licked the face of the sleeping little bear, then gently pulled him into his arms and closed his eyes. Although there weren't so many rich and wonderful stories, his life was not boring. In addition to filling his stomach and looking for a suitable place to live, these activities were no different from other polar bears. He also had a strange little bear to accompany him. In the past, when he woke up, the sun was in the sky, but now he woke up without seeing the sun. It felt so new. No matter how long he slept, he still felt that the sun was not up yet. He could still sleep a little longer. Lazy Bear, who woke up but didn't want to get up, lay in Ao Daisai's arms and scratched his feet. No one could tell that under his cozy and cute appearance, he was experiencing a battle between polar bears. Should he get up and hurry, little bear? Oh no, he didn't want to. But that voice said, "You are now a big bear that is about to live independently. You have to know that time is money." Oh, little bear turned over and continued to scratch his feet. It was so embarrassing. He had heard such words too many times since he was young, so he was immune to them. Ao Daisai's plan to keep him as a pet didn't succeed. In the end, he was still a garbage bear. Bear body attack. This couldn't be tolerated. Xiao Qishi's emotions got the better of him, and he immediately got up. Ow, ow, ow. The first thing little bear did when he got up was to encourage himself. One day, he would keep Ao Daisai as a pet. As usual, when Little Bear got up, Ao Daisai would also get up. He would pull the little bear into his arms and lick him. It had to be said that this action was gay, but Xiao Qishi hoped that everyone wouldn't think too much about it. For polar bears, this was just a daily wash, as simple as washing their face and brushing their teeth. Who doesn't wash their face and brush their teeth when they wake up? The method was different, but the principle was the same. After receiving a passive Arctic-style wash, Xiao Qishi, who didn't want to lick Ao Daisai's little Ao Daisai, licked Ao Daisai's face, and that was it. Then they started to set off and move forward. The road ahead was long. After walking for a week, the two polar bears found a new place to settle down. Other than stones and a few short shrubs, the surrounding area was barren. There shouldn't be any other polar bears coming to join in the fun. Xiao Qishi, who easily had a sense of belonging to a place, prayed that they could stay here smoothly until the ice was frozen. Ao Daisai took a fancy to a rock cave here. It couldn't be called a rock cave, but a few huge stones piled together to form a space. The other party was busy cleaning up the sand and debris inside. There were no tools, only bare paws and mouth. Was this a temporary residence? Xiao Qishi curiously went over to take a look. Because it was too narrow, it could accommodate sleeping, but it was obviously not enough for activities. Ao Daisai gently and politely pushed Little Bear out. He looked like he was saying, "Be good, play, and don't disturb my work." Xiao Qishi! Exclamation point. Xiao Qishi had been with Ao Daisai for so long that she almost forgot that polar bears could build nests. But generally, only female polar bears would do this, because female polar bears needed to give Little Bear a stable nest. Male polar bears didn't have such a desire. As bachelors, it didn't matter where they slept. Ao Daisai suddenly became active in building a nest. Could it be that her maternal instincts were stimulated by him? Xiao Qishi looked down at himself. He wasn't small anymore. Recently, his body had begun to twitch, and he had grown a lot taller. He estimated that he would be able to jump again in winter. Fortunately, under Ao Daisai's feeding, he had absorbed enough nutrients. Compared to the other little polar bears who were full and hungry, he grew up quickly and was very healthy. However, Xiao Qishi was so happy that she had a place to live. She immediately set up the house with Ao Daisai. There were some gaps between the huge stones. The autumn sea breeze easily poured in. Xiao Qishi brought some stones of suitable size to block the gaps. His actions infected Ao Daisai. Soon, Ao Daisai would also carry stones to add bricks to the house. The stone house for the two polar bears was completed in an hour. Xiao Qishi rolled around happily inside. After having Zixiong, he now had a house bear. After being happy, he came out to take a look. Ao Daisai was fishing by the sea nonstop. What a hard-working and honest polar bear. In the future, the lucky female polar bear, the male polar bear wouldn't always take care of the female polar bear. Well, Xiao Qishi thought, there seemed to be no way to stay with Ao Daisai forever. Male polar bears were bachelors like the wind. The author has something to say. I'm not feeling well today. I'm not in good condition. Everyone, please bear with it. W. Chapter 30. Xiao Qishi, who had been promoted to a house owner, thought happily that he should still have more than 20 years to live. This stone house could become his and Ao Daisai's real estate. In the future, they could live here for a period of time every summer. As long as Ao Daisai did not break up with him, this house would be the joint property of the two bears. Thinking about it, he had bought a house in the Arctic at such a young age. Awesome. What was even more awesome was that this house had a sea view. When he went out, he would be facing the sea. The scenery should be very good in summer. However, Xiao Qishi was a little uncertain whether his ability to identify the route was as accurate as Ao Daisai's. To be honest, he didn't even remember the route back to the pole. He only vaguely remembered that they stopped at 5 islands, or maybe 6. He suddenly realized that he couldn't do anything and inevitably felt a little ashamed. However, he didn't introspect for too long. He quickly regained his confidence and jogged to the beach. At least in terms of catching fish, he was still good at it. Polar falcons were notorious sneak attackers. They relied on their fast flying speed to often snatch food from the mouths of other animals, such as fish in the hands of polar bears, mice in the mouth of Arctic foxes, and even prey in the eyes of wolves. Aodicei, who had a strong aura, was rarely a target that falcons dared to intercept. After all, a strong male polar bear was not to be trifled with. If they were not careful, they would pluck out all their feathers. Xiao who was small and weak, was different. The only prey he had killed was limited to a few kilograms of sea fish. He didn't have any murderous aura. It was expected that the falcons would target the fish in his mouth. The little polar bear, who was fishing seriously in the sea, did not feel the approaching danger at all. He held his breath and picked up a fish from the water. His sharp fangs had already crossed the fish's body. The tip of his tongue tasted blood, but he wanted to give this fish to Aodicei. While the little bear was moving with the fish in his mouth, a falcon rushed out of the night like an arrow and whizzed past the little bear's eyes. Ouch! Xiao felt a pain on the back of his nose. The little bear's frightened cry rippled on the sea surface. Aodicei, who was nearby, immediately came over anxiously. Xiao cry was not entirely because of the pain, but mainly because he was frightened. After all, he was afraid of this gloomy environment. Of course, he would scream when an unknown thing suddenly appeared. When he reacted, he found that the fish in his mouth had been pulled. That was to say, the thing that was not a supernatural ghost, but a bird that was snatching food. Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. It was great that there were no ghosts. But, damn you. Chow. Chi rushed in the direction where the robber flew off and cursed the robber's 18 generations of ancestors in a fit of rage. Indeed, Xiao was usually very kind to small animals. On weekends, he would buy canned food to feed the stray cats. But now, everyone was a small animal. Oh, he did not want to spoil the other party. Why? His fish, it took Aodicei 20 to 30 seconds to swim anxiously to the little bear's side from a distance. When he arrived at the scene, he immediately saw the little bear that he was worried about floating on the surface of the water. This scared Aodicei. But in fact, Xiao just did not control his body. He floated on the surface of the water and went with the flow. His heart was full of the fish that he had caught with great difficulty. It should have been eaten by Aodicei. Woo-woo. He was so angry. That's right, the beating of the animal world came too suddenly. Aodicei reacted and held the little bear in his arms. He used his sensitive nose to carefully search for the location of the injury on the other party's body. His warm tongue kept licking the little bear's mouth that was slightly open because of his bad mood. There was still residual sea fish blood there. Aodicei was very familiar with it. After carefully searching for a long time, Aodicei finally found the wound on the little bear. It was a scar on the back of the nose. A little blood seeped out, and he smelled it. This wound was not big. If he did not pay attention, it might be healed in 2 days. If it was measured in human length units, it was about less than a centimeter. However, Aodicei still paid special attention to it. He kept licking the little bear's wound, and his whole body exuded a distressed aura. At the same time, he was angry at the perpetrator. The two emotions intertwined with each other. In a word, he was angry and anxious. If the falcon was still there, Aodicei would definitely do everything he could to tear the falcon apart. Then, he would pluck its feathers and eat its meat. Xiao wasn't that vicious. She was merely angry that someone had snatched something from her. She didn't want to see blood. Aodicei's sharp emotions were so strong that even Xiao, who was feeling sad, could feel it. After he pulled his attention back to reality, he saw Aodicei's angry expression. Well, it turns out that polar bears are not expressionless. They're just too calm. Wait, that's not the point. The point is that Aodicei is angry too. It's not worth it for a fish. It's just a small problem. Xiao Qishi immediately hugged his little friend, who seemed to be on the verge of going berserk, and rubbed his face. Don't, it's just a fish. There's no need to be angry. Really, Ao Daisai, your health is important. Don't be angry. Moi. Realizing that Ao Daisai cared more than him, Xiao Qishi immediately put his little emotions behind him and hugged him and licked him. What he didn't know was that Ao Daisai was angry not because of the fish, but because the falcon scratched him, even if the wound was less than a centimeter. But the little bear was bleeding. At this time, Xiao Qishi had already forgotten about the injury on the back of his nose. He only had Ao Daisai in his heart. He hoped that Ao Daisai would be in a good mood again. They had been together for a long time. The little polar bear knew how to please Ao Daisai. After a round of kissing and hugging, Ao Daisai's emotions slowly stabilized, and he no longer thought about the falcon that hurt Xiao Qishi. He lowered his head and licked the little bear's wound again very lovingly. Polar bears also feel fear and panic. Just now, the little bear was floating on the surface of the sea, which undoubtedly made Ao Daisai feel fear and panic. Now that the other party had become lively again, it also calmed his emotions. It's good that he's okay. Ao Daisai's state just now was really scary. Although the sharp anger was not directed at him, the little bear, who was close by, still felt his hair stand on end. He still wanted to catch another fish for Ao Daisai, so he plunged into the sea. At this time, the salty seawater splashed on the wound on the back of his nose. There was a stinging pain, and he remembered that he had been honorably injured in the short confrontation just now. Xiao Qishi immediately cursed the other party's 18 generations of ancestors again. He tried to swim to the distant sea where the fish gathered, but a force lifted him up to the surface, then hugged him and swam back to the shore. Little Bear's plan to sail was interrupted, and at the same time, he translated the other party's meaning from this forced interference. Don't go into the sea if you're injured. Go back and rest. I'll take care of you. Hey, can you not be so overbearing? We're just two polar bears, and we're both male. Damn it, the sea breeze made his eyes dry. But how can Ao Daisai be so good? It's really puzzling. The overbearing Ao Daisai sent Little Bear back to the door of his new home, reluctantly rubbed against him twice, then turned around and went to the beach again. Strange words appeared in the little bear's mind. If I catch fish with my hands, I can't hug you. If I hug you, I can't go into the sea to catch fish to feed you. Staring at Ao Daisai's back that gradually disappeared into the sea, Xiao Qishi blinked. At this moment, a different emotion arose in his heart. It was sour and astringent, with a little bit of shock. When Xiao Qishi was a human, he would cry every time he watched animal-themed movies. He was rarely moved when he watched familial and romantic movies. Maybe it was because the feelings of animals always carried the spirit of dedication and sacrifice for the person he was protecting thousands of times without hesitation. In reality, animals' emotions never lie, and their likes and dislikes were obvious at a glance. The little polar bear thought as it recalled how it had spent the past few months in the wild. It sniffled and thought to itself, Otis must have fallen in love with this charming little bear. What else could it be? Little Bear stood outside the house and expressed his feelings for a while. He let the sea breeze dry some of the hair on his body. Then he happily entered the house. Why did he have to stand outside in the cold wind when he had a house? He really didn't understand how those guys who didn't have a house lived. Xiao Qishi didn't stay in the house for long before Ao Daisai came back. It was like a huge shadow in the night, but it didn't make the little bear feel the slightest bit afraid, because the other party had a fat sea fish in its mouth and fed it to him as soon as possible. Of course, it was impossible to refuse. There was something wrong with one's mind if one didn't eat actively. However, the little polar bear only ate the bottom part of the fish head. The head and the remaining half of the fish body were spat on the ground without looking at it. Ao Daisai licked its mouth every day, its eyes moving back and forth between the little bear and the fish. It was full of urging. However, Xiao Qishi just didn't eat it. Ao Daisai blinked and looked around blankly. It was obvious that it couldn't do anything to this picky little bear. In the end, it lay down and ate the rest of the fish head and tail. Xiao leaned over and touched Ao Daisai. Okay, don't go hunting anymore. Sleepy sleep. In order to keep the other owner of the house, the little polar bear snuggled into Ao Daisai's arms. It began to pretend to be asleep. Even if Otis was given another brain, he would not know that little bear was trying to trick him. So he thought that the little bear was really going to sleep. So he dismissed the idea of going out to hunt again. On the first night of moving into the new house, the two polar bears slept exceptionally soundly. Except for some cracks in the house that weren't blocked and there was a faint wind leakage, everything else was fine. On a cold autumn night, the biting wind blew across the polar continent. It was true that polar bears were not afraid of the cold, but the power of the cold wind was sometimes more terrible than the cold. Staying in the house was indeed safe and comfortable. When they woke up, they heard a sound outside like the wind crying. The strong wind was here. It might pass quickly, or it might last for a while. The details were only known by humans. After becoming a polar bear, this data could no longer be obtained from the internet. Predicting the weather could only rely on intuition, sixth sense, and a sensitive nose. Since Xiao Qi was a half-baked polar bear, he might lose these advantages. This wasn't a problem of him not working hard. Finding that he was unaware of the strong wind, the little polar bear sighed. He had never felt that it was not easy to be an animal as it was now. Especially animals without a house. Thanks to Ao Daisai, he arranged a warm home before the wind raged. Before the strong wind passed, Ao Daisai didn't go out. He quietly nestled in the house, either sleeping, licking Xiao Qi, or playing with Xiao Qi. As for the content of play, it was, of course, quite childish. A bad day for hunting would have been a good time to work hard. Due to the limited space in the house, the fierce fighting turned into cheap teasing. For example, while Ao Daisai was yawning, he stuffed the bear's paw into his mouth. Ao Daisai, after being stunned for a moment, he began to lick the coquettish little bear's paw. For example, he climbed onto Ao Daisai's back and used his hundreds of pounds of weight to flatten him. Ao Daisai, this weight was no burden to him, and he didn't find the little bear's behavior strange. The little bear liked to hang on his mother's back and be carried by his mother. Maybe the little bear just remembered these memories. Ao Daisai's temper was too good. Otherwise, why would people say that Xiao Qi was bored and despicable? It was because he did not do anything. For the last time, he sat on Ao Daisai's head with his buttocks, thinking that this time he would probably fail, right? Xiao Qi's intuition was very accurate. If he used this intuition on the right path, he wouldn't still be a rookie bear. Ao Daisai turned his head and bit the little bear's fat leg, pulled the other off his head, and then pressed it under his chest and bit lightly. The other's teeth rhythmically knocked against his ribs, and there was an itch. Sorry, that was Xiao Qi's itchy flesh. He immediately twisted his bare body and tried to escape from Ao Daisai's punishment. It was a boring, windy day, and they were also bored. As the saying goes, there is no smoke without fire. The wind and waves were also big, and the sound of surging waves was endless. Little Bear was so afraid that his new house would be flooded. Fortunately, the house was some distance away from the shore, and the waves couldn't reach here. After a few days, Little Bear had a new experience in his new house. There was nothing wrong with the sea view house except that it was a little noisy. The human weather station had already detected that the wind in parts of the polar region was relatively strong these days. The people engaged in conservation work naturally paid attention to the climate change in the Arctic and were worried about it. This time, the strong wind covered a large area, and many animals would be affected by it. Ao Daisai and Yolashanda also live in the range, and it was unknown how they would survive. In this kind of weather, the drones had been completely withdrawn, leaving only the land observation cameras. However, it was impossible to use land cameras to observe the lives of polar bears. They were very destructive. Once they found a moving camera moving around, the camera would definitely be damaged. The wind is very strong. Pray for the little animals in the polar region. Actually, their radar is more sensitive than the weather station. It would be good if they could find a place to hide. Have you forgotten? Last year, during the strong wind period, they filmed a very iron-headed polar bear lying directly on the bare ground, holding his head with his paws. Haha, sorry, I brought AO Daisai directly. This iron-headed polar bear is very cute. Their tonnage can't be blown away by the wind, so they can be willful. It's not a problem for a single polar bear to be iron-headed, but AO Daisai took the little bear with him. With how much he dotes on the little bear, I think it's impossible that he didn't do anything. They must have found a place to hide. I'm a staff member at the rescue station. Monitoring AO Daisai and Yolashanda's location has been stationary for many days. They are indeed hiding. After a few days, the wind weakened a little and the drones went out again. As expected, they filmed 2 polar bears nesting in a stone cave by the seaside. How comfortable. What a pair of smart big guys. The person who was sorting out the data smiled. I was worried for nothing. Hey, look carefully here. The colleague pointed at a part of the stone house with artificial marks. This is a stone of different color. It must have been deliberately placed there to block the gaps between the stones. Who did this? In any case, it couldn't be these 2 polar bears. Could it be the Inuit who didn't have a fixed place to stay? Of course it can't be the polar bears. The other person smiled. Male polar bears don't build nests. Only female polar bears who are ready to breed will build nests. If a male polar bear helps a female polar bear build a nest, then he must be the best father on the continent. That's true. The person who was talking to him nodded. Male polar bears were all scumbags. During the long breeding season, they would mate with multiple female polar bears and leave without any hesitation after mating. This was the nature of polar bears, and it seemed that they could not be called scumbags. After the strong wind, the sea returned to calm. The animals that had been hiding for a few days came out to look for food. They found that the strong wind had blown away the fog on the ground and the sea. Winter was coming, and the weather was getting colder. It almost reached the conditions for snow. Xiao Qishi woke up and couldn't wait to walk out of the house to breathe in the fresh air. At the same time, he stretched his body. He was about to turn around and call out to AO Daisai to come out and stretch his body when he realized that AO Daisai had followed him out. Although she was still a little sleepy, it seemed that as long as Little Bear didn't get up, she could still sleep for another 300 rounds, but she still followed him closely. They went to the sea to catch fish together. Xiao Qishi was a self-aware person. On one hand, he felt that AO Daisai was really pitiful. She could sleep in a nest without eating or drinking, but she couldn't be lazy because she had to raise the cubs. On the other hand, he felt that the rice was not delicious. If she could move, why did she have to lie down all the time? Get out of the comfort zone, brother. Even the polar bear was hungry, so the thief who liked to steal must be hungry too. This time, Xiao Qishi was especially careful. Once he caught a fish, he was alert and alert. He finally realized his fantasy. Before AO Daisai could wake up, he fed her a fish that he had caught. The feeling of keeping AO Daisai was wonderful. Happy. AO Daisai woke up from a deep sleep for a few days and was still a little out of it. Until a fish was fed in her mouth, she subconsciously ate it. Eating was really delicious. Not to mention that it was a fish fed by Little Bear. At this point, the lazy behemoth was completely awake. Her dark eyes contained an indescribable love for her little bear. The author has something to say. Thank you for your super heartwarming concern. Recently, the weather's been getting colder and colder. Keep warm, carrot 3 carat. Chow chow. Hurry up and snow. Hurry up and freeze. I want to eat seals. President AO. House seals as long as the Arctic Circle has it, as long as you want it. This article is also called Arctic Love Story. Chapter 31. At the Polar Animal Research Station, a bunch of experts and professors became interested in the stone house by the sea. They all speculated whether it was a masterpiece left behind by the Inuit or other highly intelligent animals. As for polar bears, everyone thought it was unlikely. Shionka seemed to have always given people the impression that it was clumsy and reckless. It only had brute force and a fierce temper, and it seemed that it had nothing to do with strategy. However, people did not forget that there was a brown bear with outstanding achievements in World War II. Its life was very exciting, and it had created many great achievements and touching deeds. The story of how it obtained the rank of a second-class soldier as an animal was still widely circulated. In order to figure out what was going on, the research station decided to put land cameras around the two polar bears after discussion. In fact, this idea was not on a whim. The research station had wanted to do this for a long time. First of all, when the polar night came, it was more difficult for drones to take photos, and they could no longer get more high-quality photos. Second, aerial photography could only take photos from one point of view, which had long been unable to satisfy people's curiosity about Aodicei and Ulashanda. The reason why they did not put land cameras before was that Aodicei and Ulashanda were always on the move, and the efficiency of putting cameras could not keep up with the pace of their migration. At present, these two polar bears, seem to have a house by the sea. What could be more delightful than this? Just thinking about the two polar bears having a home to shelter them from the wind and rain on this barren land, the corners of their mouths could not help but curl up into a smile. Also, they had settled down so the land cameras could start working. It was a calm night, and the stars were still so bright, as beautiful as the eyes of the charming little bear, Ulashanda. A walking camera that was wrapped in a stone vest came silently. This was the most advanced field camera equipment from the China market. According to the introduction, it was very powerful and claimed to be able to take relatively clear and bright photos at night. The only problem was that it was too expensive. At present, the prevalence of this expensive equipment was very low. Only animals with gentle habits deserved to have it, such as small and cute otters, foxes, and rabbits. Polar bears were naturally ferocious and ranked at the top of the list of animals that liked to attack cameras. The research station was willing to use such expensive equipment to track Aodicei and Ulashanda. Perhaps it was because they liked the two polar bears too much, or they believed that the steady and reliable Aodicei and the kind and cute Ulashanda would not play with the poor camera, lest their trust not to be betrayed. The floor-to-ceiling camera had already started working. Perhaps he could name it Little Rock. At present, every frame captured by Little Sure-To was instantly transmitted to the computers in the research station for people to view. They were about to observe the lives of Aodicei and Ulashanda up close. The researcher, who had been overlooking them all this time, could not take his eyes off them. The first thing that appeared on the screen was the house of the two polar bears. The close-up shot made it even clearer. There were indeed traces of processing on the house. Some of the gaps were completely blocked, leaving only the entrance and exit. At this time, the two polar bears were not at home. They were probably in the sea, actively catching fish to fill their stomachs. Little Sure-To went around to the door and saw a bright yellow color inside. At this time, the researcher in front of the computer cheered. "Look, it's Ulashanda's bucket." It was placed neatly in the house. "How cute, The researcher who was peeping at the polar bear's house laughed. Oh, when it was on Ulashanda's head, it felt very small, but now it doesn't seem small. Someone discovered this point. Visual inspection shows that it's a 20-liter, shallow-mouth industrial bucket. A group of experts and professors commented on Ulashanda's bucket with great interest. Perhaps the yellow bucket also found it hard to believe that it would one day become the object of attention. The reason for all this was because it belonged to the little polar bear, Ulashanda. Soon, Little Sure-To had photographed the inside and outside of the house. At this time, it needed to find a good place to squat and wait for the two polar bears to return. About an hour later, there was movement on the beach. Ulashanda, who had just eaten, was the first to appear on the screen. It was the first time that he was photographed from this angle. His front appearance could be clearly seen, as well as his lazy steps and the flashing soles of his feet when he raised his paws. The black plum-shaped meat pads were quite cute. So cute, so cute. Ulashanda is really white. These thick and strong arms are so cute. The people around the computer could imagine how the little polar bear's arms felt and the cute round soles of his feet. That was the little feet that A.O. Daisai lovingly held in its mouth. "Ah, look at this round face, big eyes. This chubby figure, Yulashanda." Someone in the office stood up excitedly and waved his hands, even shaking his butt. He's so cute, he's so cute." Because Yulashanda's front appearance was too cute, many people turned over. This seemed to be expected. After all, the little bear looked very cute, even from a bird's eye view. Of course, the front image would not be bad. Compared to the photos taken at the rescue station a few months ago, Yulashanda had grown taller and had grown up. His face had the heroic spirit of an adult polar bear, but he was still very cute. Little Rock had been following the extremely good-looking polar bear cub for a while. As he had a mission to complete, he had no choice but to look away reluctantly. He switched the camera to Otis, the big polar bear who had just come ashore. When A.O. Daisai's figure appeared on the screen, everyone held their breaths for a moment, and their minds immediately filled with the words, "Oh my God." This was really a huge polar bear. Using the word huge to describe A.O. Daisai was the most appropriate. Earlier, people had already thought that Yulashanda's limbs were thick and strong enough. Now, compared to A.O. Daisai, they were simply dwarfed. If the little polar bear was a synonym for cute and beautiful, people couldn't help but like it and want to hug and kiss it, then A.O. Daisai was a completely different type. This huge polar bear was different from other sloppy polar bears. It was rare for him to maintain a body of pure white fur. At first glance, people were attracted by his tall and strong body lines, or rather, the feeling of strength that came from him was more appropriate. Next was his handsome and charming face. Even in the autumn, he didn't look thin. It could be seen that not only did he take good care of Yulashanda, but he also took good care of himself. Not only that, A.O. Daisai's slightly squinted eyes made him look charmingly naive, unlike other polar bears. The eyes were the windows to the soul, and the eyes never lied. A.O. Daisai's eyes were deep and full of wisdom, and his mighty and steady temperament was as reliable as imagined. Although the researchers who admired him didn't raise their arms and cheer like before, that was because they were already subdued by A.O. Daisai's rare temperament. Was this really just a polar bear? Many people in the room vaguely had this question in their hearts. It wasn't that they were really suspicious, but more of them were just expressing their amazement. They were amazed by the outstanding polar bear that they knew. It's always been said that polar bears are the kings of the polar regions, the overlords of the ice. To be honest, I didn't think so before. One of the professors sighed and said, "That's because I've seen with my own eyes how they're struggling to survive on this land. They don't look like kings at all." He paused for a moment and suddenly laughed. "After seeing Otis, I've changed my mind. A.O. Daisai does have the aura of a king." Someone agreed. "Yes," the professor said, and then added, "It's not just A.O. Daisai. In fact, all lives that can control their own destiny are kings." Xiao Qixi didn't know that the inside of his house and his only property had been seen by everyone when he went out for a meal. After all, this was the North Pole. When he built his house here, he didn't think about locking the door. If Xiao Qixi knew that someone not only spied on his house, but also installed surveillance cameras near his house, he would definitely sigh. Oh no, the moral degeneration of the world. When the little polar bear came ashore, he didn't immediately enter the house. First of all, his body was still wet. He needed to shake off the water and let the north wind blow. Secondly, the house was cramped. Other than sleeping time, the lively little polar bear still liked to move around outdoors. This was the willfulness of the little bear who had a house. If he wanted to stay outside, he would stay outside. If he wanted to stay inside, he would stay inside. Unlike the other bears in this area, he was pitiful. Yulashanda's smug today, January 1st. The sand on this beach was fine and clean, without any impurities. A.O. Daisai would lie on the beach and roll around, using the sand to absorb the excess water on his hair so that his hair could dry quickly. The snow also had the same effect of absorbing water. These two things were their little tricks in life. Therefore, when the polar bear just came ashore, it didn't roll around on the ice because it was itchy. It was equivalent to a human using a bath towel to wipe their body after taking a bath. Xiao Qishi disliked the sand at first. Who knew if it was clean or not? He didn't want to roll around on the ground with Ao Daisai at all. However, later on, he saw that Ao Daisai didn't turn into a gray fatty after rolling around. He was really good. At this time, little Shirdu stealthily aimed the camera at the two polar bears that were twisting their bodies on the beach, trying to capture their every move. Under the camera, the little polar bear was still about a meter away from the big polar bear. At this time, he suddenly paused, turned his head to look in the direction of the big polar bear, and then rolled over. This bump solidly hit Ao Daisai's waist. The people in front of the computer. What a naughty little polar bear, but so cute. Every pair of eyes here could see that the little bear did it on purpose. But should he be condemned? People stared at the screen with smiles on their faces. No, at least humans wouldn't condemn the cute Yulishanda. As for Ao Daisai, well, it was needless to say, he was probably the last person in the world who would condemn the little bear. In the video, Ao Daisai stopped moving and directly stretched out his arms to hug the little bear. He placed the little bear on his abdomen. The two round heads, one big and one small, leaned against each other and rubbed against each other. It seemed that Ao Daisai raised his head and licked Yulishanda. After a short few seconds of intimate interaction, Ao Daisai continued to roll his body left and right with the little bear, letting the sand absorb the water on his entire back. At this moment, he was equivalent to a rocking car. There was no need to insert coins. Just a coquettish look from the little bear was enough to start it. Xiao Qishi knew a few months ago that Ao Daisai could be played like this, so every time the other party began to roll on the ground, he happily came up, swaying left, swaying right. It was very comfortable, and there was no need for him to take any protective measures. Ao Daisai would firmly hug his body. It seemed to tacitly agree that this was a small game to coax him. Sometimes, even when his fur was dry, he would lie down and not get up, just to let the little bear play happily. The happy post-meal time could relieve the fatigue of the polar bears, whether it was for Xiao Qishi or Ao Daisai. Although their lives were only about eating and sleeping, who said that they couldn't feel tired. Desire was endless, of course. The more comfortable, the better. Xiao Qishi naturally wouldn't be selfish enough to treat Ao Daisai as a free automatic toy. He wasn't that kind of bear. In fact, every time he enjoyed the other party's service, he would reciprocate accordingly. When he was a human, he had heard of a service for animals called animal massage. At first, it sounded very strange. Even animals were so particular these days. But there was indeed a scientific basis. Some pet owners did not hesitate to pay a high price for this service in order to make their beloved pets healthier. Xiao Qishi really wanted Ao Daisai to be healthy. If they were in human society, he would have applied for a card for Ao Daisai no matter what. But now, he didn't have the conditions to apply for a card, so he could only do it himself. After enjoying the daily rocking car, it was Xiao Qishi's turn to use his little bear paws to massage Ao Daisai's tired back muscles. This was an effective way to relax the muscles. Didn't the gym teacher often say that one should relax their muscles after exercising? Very correct. The polar bears caught fish in the water, and the amount of exercise they did was no less than their friends in the gym who played iron. If Ao Daisai complained that his little bear paws were not strong enough, it didn't matter. He could still step on it. Of course, doing this was always very tiring, but as long as he thought about Ao Daisai, he could be healthier. Well, that was enough. Xiao Qishi, who was so tired that his limbs were cramping, lay on the sand and thought about when the Arctic Circle would have an award and give him the 3 good little bear. By the way, he also had to give Ao Daisai 3 good, 3 good, 3 good something, before the sleepy little polar bear could think of a good title for Ao Daisai. He couldn't resist the sleepiness that invaded him and fell asleep. In his dream, he dreamed that the place he was staying in really had an award, and he successfully received the title of the 3 good little bear. He also received a silk banner that was hanging in the house. How could he be so handsome? Ao Daisai sniffed the little bear's nose and found that the other party had fallen asleep. He blinked and looked around, seemingly helpless against the little bear that was sleeping everywhere. Fortunately, it was calm today, and sleeping outside was okay. Ao Daisai blew out a cloud of white mist from his nose, and he was ready to sleep. He stood up and moved to another position, lay down, and used his body to encircle the little bear so that he could sleep comfortably even outside. The people watching the surveillance also realized that Yelashanda was asleep and Ao Daisai was protecting him. This scene was so heartwarming. "Good night, Yelashanda. Good night, Ao Daisai," people said softly. After waking up from the dream, Xiao Qishi found that he was sleeping on the beach and didn't go into the house. He got up sleepily and yawned, and then suddenly remembered something and jumped over Ao Daisai's back. This time, he didn't trip, which meant that he had improved a lot. Not bad, not bad. The little polar bear ran into the house, stared at the walls of his house, and then laughed foolishly in his heart. What a comical dream it was. What a small banner. Suddenly, Xiao Qishi heard a different sound. Perhaps this kind of sound wouldn't attract the attention of wild polar bears, but Xiao Qishi was very concerned. It seemed to be the sound of a remote control car on the ground. He immediately came out of the house and walked around the house, as if looking for something. This scene made the researchers in front of the computer very nervous. It's coming, the famous scene of the polar bears fighting the camera is coming. They hesitated and thought about whether it was better to stay put for now or to quickly control the little rock to leave the little bear's field of vision. Stop, if we move again, it will attract his attention. Finally, they decided. At this time, Xiao Qishi had already seen the extra rock near the house. The surrounding area was empty, and he and Ao Daisai had deliberately cleared it. This rock was very out of place. Other polar bears might not care about an extra rock around them, but Xiao Qishi was different. He would be scared to death if a rock suddenly appeared around him. A paranormal event. The little polar bear immediately became angry. He hesitated between going back to Ao Daisai and finding out what was going on. With his good eyesight, he saw the wheel under the rock. "Xiao Qishi, something's wrong with you." "Little rock." He slowly walked closer and easily saw that it was a fake rock. Its real identity was a camera. The little polar bear's face, which was close to the camera, froze. His real heart, what? A camera is filming me? Ah, a bolt from the blue. The researchers thought in his heart. The little guy must have never seen a camera before. At this moment, he is full of curiosity and desire to explore. What cute little guy. Nonsense. Xiao Qishi had watched countless animal documentaries, so of course he knew about the existence of wild cameras. He just didn't expect that there would be a camera around him and Ao Daisai. After all, they never stayed in the same place for too long. After a rational analysis, they were not suitable for tracking. In that case, they hadn't been here for long before the camera came, which meant that they had been tracked. Perhaps their whereabouts had been recorded since they left the animal rescue station. Xiao Qishi, how should he put it? When he first found out that he was being filmed by a camera, he was really resistant. Why did those people do this? Invading the privacy of the two polar bears. Then he thought about it. Was the purpose of people doing this to better understand animals so that they could help them in all aspects? Maybe it was. Xiao Qishi believed that there was such a group of lovely and respectable people in the world, always fighting at the forefront of protecting animals and the environment. They were a group of unknown soldiers. Ah, if I can also help, why not? He just had to contribute some data. As long as the other party didn't mind that the data might be a bit fake, oh no, a bit wrong. Oh no, it was a bit non-mainstream. He was willing to help. The non-mainstream little polar bear's only request was that the research station take a picture of him and Ao Daisai. The author has something to say. *W to the power of I will put a picture of Goldie's bucket design on Weibo. Babies who are interested can go and take a look. ID. Jinjiang's Mo Rugi. Chapter 32. Ao Daisai was astonishingly possessive of Little Bear. Even though he still hadn't slept enough, he still opened his eyes and got up. He followed Xiao Qishi's scent and went out. At this time, Xiao Qishi was playing with the camera outside. In order to not make the data look too unconventional, he felt that he should show the curiosity that a real wild polar bear should have. So he raised his front paw and scratched the head of the fake stone a few times. He pretended to be energetic but impatient. After playing with the stone for a few times, he lost interest. It just so happened that Ao Daisai came. Xiao Qishi was quite nervous for a while. After all, he had heard that polar bears like to rub cameras. Fortunately, Ao Daisai only glanced at the fake stone and didn't think that there was anything unusual about it. His attention quickly turned to Xiao Qishi. He came over and rubbed against Xiao Qishi, as if blaming Xiao Qishi for leaving alone. Xiao Qishi didn't know if she should believe her intuition. Anyway, she believed it first. Of course, Ao Daisai didn't really blame Xiao Qishi. Perhaps it was more appropriate to describe it as rebuking. When Xiao Qishi rubbed against him, he was quickly coaxed. In his heart, he found a reason for Little Bear's departure. He was hungry. Ao Daisai was very straightforward. He and Little Bear rubbed against each other and turned to the beach. The camera quietly recorded this scene. Thanks to the mercy of the two polar bears, Little Shirtu managed to avoid a disaster and could now work in peace. Looking at the fake stone with ordinary camouflage ability, the little polar bear walked slowly while guessing who the camera was working for. Would his daily life with Ao Daisai be edited into a BBC production or broadcast on CCTV's Animal World program? In his heart, Little Bear hoped that it was CCTV. If his dream came true, he would feel a sense of accomplishment. Imagine, half a year ago, he was still a loyal viewer of Animal World. Half a year later, he became a member of Animal World. Just thinking about it made him excited. From the day she had a camera by her side, Xiao Qishi intended to turn over a new leaf and become a normal little bear. At the very least, she wanted to provide the country with unadulterated data. There were too many human behaviors, such as crossing one's legs, rolling one's eyes, using little yellow to store things, deliberately farting at Ao Daisai, deliberately putting one's foot into Ao Daisai's mouth, and even pulling Ao Daisai's tail. The little polar bear counted and wondered why Ao Daisai hadn't thrown it away yet. Was he picking a date? It was not difficult to give up these habits. It was nothing more than returning to the time when he had just started living with Ao Daisai. At that time, Little Bear still knew how to be polite. After a hard day of hunting, Xiao Qishi and Ao Daisai rested at the door of their house. Ao Daisai looked at the little bear sitting upright at the door and looking at the sea. It suddenly stopped licking its paws, then lay down and exposed its belly to the night sky. Ao Daisai rubbed its back while glancing at the little bear, who was thinking about something. But Little Bear always refused to look at him, forcing him to make a low sound from his throat. Xiao Qishi glanced at his friend next door. In fact, he had already received Ao Daisai's signal to play, but there were cameras here, and he had to be on TV. He didn't want to be shown foolishly playing with Ao Daisai's belly on TV. Ao Daisai tilted its head, as if it didn't understand why Xiao Qishi didn't come. Did he not want to play the game today? Once a certain habit was formed with the polar bear's information processing ability, it was difficult to figure out why. Maybe it wouldn't think about it. However, Ao Daisai might be a more sensitive polar bear. He would have doubts and want to figure out what Xiao Qishi liked. He walked over and licked the little bear. Maybe he could develop other games. But bumping, tail pulling, anything was fine. Ao Daisai, who wanted to play with Xiao Qishi, gently touched Xiao Qishi and then walked around the other party twice with light steps. It was a hint for him to come and catch him. Seeing Ao Daisai like this, Alex couldn't help but reflect on himself. Why did he want to be an idol? Maybe he wouldn't be able to go on CCTV, and Ao Daisai would have a psychological problem. After thinking it through, Xiao Qishi rushed up and happily chased Ao Daisai's big bear all over the beach. Stop. Brother, please leave the bear's tail. Ao Daisai ran wantonly on the beach. As long as he wanted, the little polar bear couldn't touch a single hair on his head. However, he loved this little bear very much. From time to time, he would let the little bear catch him once. It had to be said that this was a very childish game. Xiao Qishi, who had the soul of an adult, thought so, and probably Ao Daisai, who had the soul of an adult bear, thought so too. But they were all willing to become childish ghosts to coax each other. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. The researchers behind the computer roughly knew what the daily movements of the two polar bears were like. Of course, the content was nothing more than sleeping, hunting, and occasionally playing. Hunting took up most of the time, and sleeping came second. This was because polar bears had bottomless appetites. Even if a sea fish weighed 10 caddies, it was difficult to fill their stomachs in a short period of time. Not to mention, 10 caddies of sea fish were rare in shallow waters. Actually, adult male polar bears can fast from June until winter, a professor said at the data analysis conference. Of course, A.O. Dicey didn't do this because he had to feed Yolashanda. He was like a mother bear with cubs. He didn't stop hunting in summer and autumn. Everyone nodded. A.O. Dicey hasn't even reached sexual maturity yet. I thought that this kind of behavior would only appear at least after he had the ability to reproduce. Generally speaking, this is the case. The factor that supports animal lactation is maternal hormones. But as you know, the rise and fall of maternal hormones can also change with time and circumstances. It can't last forever. The more they tracked, the more this group of people who love this work felt that their knowledge was still shallow when it came to polar bears. If they wanted to learn more about polar bears, it seemed that little Shih-Tzu's continued hard work was indispensable. After Xiao Qixi put down the burden of being an idol in front of it, he still didn't act dignified when he shouldn't. However, he wasn't stupid. When he wanted to act like a bear, he could just pretend with the camera behind his back. For example, when he stayed in the house, he could raise his feet as high as he wanted and stretch them wherever he wanted. It was impossible for the other party to follow him into his house and take pictures. Only the best actor could do that. Xiao Qixi thought to himself, I'm just a little bear, so I shouldn't be able to do that. What he didn't expect was that the private photos of his daily life didn't appear on CCTV. Instead, they went viral on the internet on a global scale. It was worth mentioning that the people who focused on the two polar bears were divided into several factions because of certain issues. Some people thought that A.O. Dicey and Yolashanda were friends, while others thought that it was a brotherly relationship or even a father-son relationship. One of the factions firmly believed that A.O. Dicey's feelings for Yolashanda were even more passionate than familial love. It should have gone beyond the scope of familial love. The word love appeared on the public chat, but it was obviously more of a human's imagination. It was very difficult to get recognition from the heart. Even the people who imagined it weren't sure. In addition to the two protagonists receiving enthusiastic attention, Yolashanda's yellow bucket was also exposed. This was really unexpected. Some smart businessmen seized this opportunity and rushed to produce a batch of yellow buckets similar to Yolashanda's, making a small profit on this wave. If it weren't for the fact that Xiao Qixi now had a house and assets and lived quite comfortably in the Arctic, he would have sued the businessmen until they were down to their underwear. The Buddhist-like little bear now no longer had that kind of worldly desires. For the whole of October, A.O. Dicey and Xiao Qixi stayed on this bay, living a very simple and happy life. If the fish were a little more stupid and fat, it would be even better. When the beginning of November came, the two polar bears seemed to smell the scent of ice and snow. They looked at the other side of the sea and suddenly looked forward to it. A.O. Dicey, who was very sensitive to the changes in the seasons, the changes in the humidity and temperature of the air, the trajectory of the wind, the rise and fall of the waves, all of these factors could be used as the basis for his judgment. The little polar bear felt something and also learned from him seriously. According to the changes in the surrounding environment and A.O. Dicey's performance, he almost knew that his life would soon change. In fact, Xiao Qixi guessed correctly. Soon, A.O. Dicey seemed to have made a new decision. They would continue to go north, find a suitable place to go to the sea, and then swim in the direction of the pole. As for the departure time, it should be soon. On this day, the waves on the Pacific Ocean were very small, and even the sound of the tide seemed to be a little gentler. When Xiao Qixi woke up, he received a gentle signal from A.O. Dicey to set off. The other party seemed to be a little worried about his mood, and especially licked him today. Perhaps he was worried that he wouldn't want to leave this small house. Therefore, he took extra care of his mood. Xiao Qishi was always surprised by the unexpected translation. Xiao Qishi thought to himself, "You have touched me so early in the morning." Of course, he was a little reluctant, but it was really just a little. It felt no different from going on a long trip. Anyway, he would be back tomorrow. Therefore, as soon as Xiao Qishi received the signal, he hurriedly got up and packed his things. When the camera saw Yolashanda coming over with a small yellow bucket, it was happy. The next second, Yolashanda picked it up with both hands and was shocked again. The researcher behind the computer broke down. Was the little polar bear finally going to do something to the camera? Of course not. Xiao Qishi just put the fake stone into the bucket. They were going to leave the bay and wouldn't go into the water for the time being, so they would take the fake stone with them. This was quickly known by the people. The little polar bear didn't destroy the camera. It just put it into the bucket and took it away. Took it away? In less than a minute, everyone in the research station knew that Yolashanda and Ao Daisai moved and took the camera with them. Is Yolashanda treating the camera as a toy? Just like his yellow bucket. He probably treats it as his private property. We really didn't expect this. The camera didn't die under the polar bear's friction. It was just taken over by the polar bear. Do you think this camera can still work? That depends on whether Yolashanda will let it out. The camera is so pitiful. Buy the peanuts and melon seeds and wait for the follow-up. They left the bay and headed north. It was a long journey. Of course, there would be times to rest. Every time they stopped to rest, Xiao Qishi would let the camera out and let it move freely. Was this because Xiao Qishi was a kind polar bear? No, this was just one of the reasons. There must be someone monitoring the camera placed by the country. If something dangerous happened while they were sleeping, there would definitely be a notification. This was like having a surveillance camera in front of your house. It was very safe. He let the fake stone go out to patrol, while he and Ao Daisai slept happily. The researcher was very grateful that the camera could still work. Such expensive equipment was not sacrificed. At least Little Bear would remember to let it out every time it slept. Covering face, covering face, covering face. The leaders don't have to complain during the meeting. Thank you for Yolashanda's care. Is Yolashanda keeping the camera as a pet? So cute. Suddenly, I want to be that camera. Sop, 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 sop. I want to be that camera +1 and accompany them on the journey. It's very interesting just thinking about it. During the migration, it was all down to luck whether one could find food. Even Xiao Qishi, the European queen of luck, would not be able to find food for 2 to 3 days. On this day, they did not find any food even when they stopped to rest. The pampered little polar bear was so hungry that it was howling. Although he knew that the scene would be filmed, he didn't care so much. Everyone was so ordinary and private. What was wrong with howling when it was in a bad mood? This was a way to balance out the mood. At first, the people watching in front of the computer did not know why the little polar bear was howling. Was it sick? It was not until they saw Ao Daisai patiently coaxing the little bear that they vaguely understood that Yolashanda was not sick. It seemed that it was hungry and was throwing a tantrum. In the entire Arctic, there was only one polar bear that would throw a tantrum when it was hungry. They were all spoiled. At first, people were watching with relish and felt that it was great that Ao Daisai was so good to Yolashanda. Later, the more they watched, the more they felt that, Ao Daisai, you can't be like this. You should give Yolashanda some pressure. Be stricter. However, they put themselves in the role of Ao Daisai, and it seemed that it was difficult to be strict. The first 3 days of fasting was the time when hunger was at its peak. After more than a week, it would slowly adapt to this feeling. The weather was getting colder and colder. If they could not find a new hunting spot in a few days, they might go into the sea hungry. Ao Daisai probably did not want this, so he tried his best to bring the little bear to find food. The time spent on the journey had increased, and the time to sleep had decreased. Xiao Qishi could not sleep either. He actively followed Ao Daisai's footsteps and never became a burden on the journey. As they walked, they came to a cliff. The seawater splashed on the rocks, making splashing sounds. Below the cliff was a group of reefs with kelp and shellfish as food, but the path down was quite slippery. Ao Daisai was fine, but Xiao Qishi's legs were trembling. This was a little high. If he accidentally stepped on air, the whole bear would roll into the sea. However, polar bears were always unaware of their own weight and liked to challenge such high-end places. Ao Daisai walked to the bottom and then turned back to wait for Xiao Qishi, waiting for the other party to take the first step to conquer the cliff. Xiao Qishi, F***CKU. Because the path was indeed slippery, Ao Daisai took on the responsibility of carrying Little Yellow. Usually, Xiao Qishi carried Little Yellow in his mouth. He cherished it. Little Yellow was the only one. If it was broken, it would be gone. The camera was also very expensive. The little polar bear trembled as it took the first step to conquer the cliff, believing that it could do it. The sense of balance of animals was indeed amazing sometimes. For example, the rock antelope that liked to live on rocks could climb up such a high place without being afraid of heights. Now, it was Xiao Qishi's turn to admire himself. He actually managed to climb down such a rugged cliff. The moment he stepped on the reef, he felt his experience bar instantly increase by a lot. After resting his feet, he began to look around for food. He ate the kelp and shellfish slowly. There was a dense pile of food in the area that had never been mined. Fatty seafood could be scooped up with a casual grab. It would cost a lot to put it on a human's table. Polar bears, however, ate it casually. Level 1 protected animals were not within their scope of protection. They would eat them as soon as they could catch them. Xiao Qishi smacked his lips and turned his head. He saw Ao Daisai sitting on a rock, holding a huge bundle of kelp with both hands and eating with narrowed eyes. It was really simple and crude. The delicate little bear would never wallow in the mire with Ao Daisai. He held a pile of scallops and oysters and piled them up on a slightly flat reef to form a small hill. Then he sat on the side and swung his feet slowly. After eating, he piled up one pile after another. Occasionally, he would take a break and be fed some kelp by Ao Daisai. The camera was placed in a small yellow bucket in a cave on a reef. It was not released today. The researchers realized this and began to guess the situation of the two polar bears. Why was Little Stone not released after so long? After sending out drones to understand the situation, they found out that the two polar bears were fine and eating by the sea. As Xiao Qishi ate, he found that there was light snow falling from the sky. It was actually snowing. The snowflakes fell on the back of Ao Daisai's nose and melted instantly. He looked up at the sky and continued to eat. Looking at the snowflakes, but not feeling cold, was a wonderful experience. The little polar bear was in a good mood as he enjoyed the snow and ate delicious food. The naughty little bear couldn't stay idle. For example, he threw an unopened shell at Ao Daisai and the other party was stunned. About 2 meters away, he couldn't see Ao Daisai's expression clearly, but it should be helplessness. Ao Daisai picked up the scallop and happily ate the gift from his little bear. After eating for a long time, he called Little Bear and told him that it was time to go. Xiao Qishi was surprised. Were they going to the sea from here? Weren't they going ashore? His eyes suddenly looked at the small yellow bucket, mainly the camera inside. If they didn't go ashore, they would have to leave the camera behind. Although this place was a little rugged, the staff should be able to come down and take the camera away, right? Xiao Qishi thought guiltily. Well, he didn't do it on purpose. If he knew that they wouldn't go ashore, he wouldn't have brought them down. Half an hour later, the two polar bears and the small yellow bucket went into the sea together. Poor Little Stone was placed at the bottom of the cliff by Little Bear. He stayed alone on the reef and watched their backs as they left. Researcher, what? This is ridiculous. Okay? People began to think of reasons to refuse to go outdoors to retrieve the camera. It should be a good choice to tell the leader that he had a cold. After the little bear was full, he felt that he could swim 50 kilometers without panting after going into the sea. Maybe this was proof that he had grown up. However, the sea was a little scary in the dim light. Due to the light snow, although the picture was beautiful, the visibility was not high. Xiao Qishi admired Ao Daisai's sense of direction while concentrating on learning his every move. He had to memorize the route carefully. He also had to master the various details of the long journey in the sea. Knowing that the two polar bears had begun their long journey, people began to worry about them. In this season, the Greenland sleeper shark in the deep sea was a little active. According to the records, polar bears were killed in the belly of the Greenland sleeper shark every year. Of course, A.O. Daisai knew about this big killer in the deep sea of the Pacific Ocean, and he had encountered one before. It was an experience of brushing shoulders with the god of death. Perhaps it was because he had struggled on the edge of life and death several times that A.O. Daisai developed a calm and profound personality. He didn't look like a sexually immature person at all. Boss A.O., there's still a few months left. The breeding season of polar bears is March and April. A.O. Daisai is so special. When he starts eating, he probably won't follow the rules. Chapter 33. In the vast and boundless ocean, dangers lurked everywhere. Even if Qiao Qishi hadn't experienced the power of the Greenland sleeper shark, he knew how thrilling this trip was. It was summer when they swam back from the north. The conditions were better than now, but it was night now. Everything would be more difficult than during the day. Qiao Qishi was 120% alert in the water, following closely behind A.O. Daisai's figure. The thing he was most afraid of was suddenly seeing shark fins. Of course, he was even more afraid of seeing a group of fins, however. He felt that he shouldn't be so unlucky as he was possessed by the European emperor. Just as he thought this, the waves around him changed a little. It was like the movement of a large marine animal nearby. What could it be? Even Otis slowed down his movements to observe the situation. Qiao Qishi could not help but feel nervous. She tensed up as well and observed the surroundings. A.O. Daisai looked and didn't care. He continued to move forward at a constant speed. This proved that the guy who created the waves was not a threat. This was indeed the case. Later, Qiao Qishi saw what it was with his own eyes. It was a Pacific porpoise couple. This kind of porpoise liked to live in the sea about 20 meters deep near the shore. It was also an endangered animal. In recent years, because of the increasing pollution of the marine environment, they were rarely seen. Qiao Qishi was happy to have a feast for the eyes. They met by chance in the ocean. What was even better was that they were not on each other's menu. This kind of encounter was really beautiful. You should have more. Forget about the sharks. Don't come. On the way, Qiao Qishi encountered several marine animals one after another. It seemed that after dark, everyone liked to come out and act wildly. Perhaps the little bear was really lucky, or perhaps A.O. Daisai was experienced enough to lead the way. They didn't encounter any sharks along the way. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't encounter any danger. The biggest danger the little polar bear encountered was being targeted by a scaled sea turtle. It chased his feet all the way. From time to time, it opened its mouth and wanted to bite him. Qiao Qishi wondered if it was his feet that smelled. Why didn't this bastard chase after A.O. Daisai's feet instead? Of course, Qiao Qishi was embarrassed to ask A.O. Daisai to solve the problem of being chased by a turtle. After all, A.O. Daisai was concentrating on leading the way. How would he know that there was a turtle secretly causing trouble under the water behind him? In the end, the little polar bear had no choice but to kick the scaled turtle a few times, sending it flying far away. He couldn't be blamed for being too violent. It was this bastard who didn't care about martial ethics first. After that, there were no other dangers along the way. Unlike the last time, when they walked slowly and stopped from time to time, the time they spent on the shore to rest was significantly shorter this time. A.O. Daisai seemed to have made the travel plan based on Little Bear's ability to accept things. The timing was just right. It would not let Little Bear be too tired and stuck in an acceptable range. In the middle of November, the sea ice was condensing at a rapid speed. The sea ice area of more than 9 million square meters was enough to attract most of the polar bears back to the ice. Qiao Qishi could feel Otis's urgency. It was as if something was urging him to return to the surface of the ice as soon as possible so that he could hunt enough food to make up for the losses he had suffered in the past 2 seasons. In autumn and summer, Ao Daisai's weight had been stagnant. But in fact, like the little polar bear, he was still in the growth period. There was still room for his weight to increase. Perhaps he would reach his peak before the age of 10. Adult polar bears generally ate enough in the winter. They stored enough fat to prepare for the arrival of spring. In spring, they would focus on the opposite sex, and their attention on food would decrease significantly until they found the person they liked and completed the breeding process. Xiao Qishi certainly didn't understand that Ao Daisai, who was about to reach sexual maturity, had a flame in his body. That was why he was so eager to return to the ice. The reason why he was so eager to return to the ice was much simpler. It was because there were seals on the ice. The speed at which the sea ice condensed reduced the distance that the two polar bears needed to travel. This was good news that made Yulashanda smile. A week later, they touched the edge of the sea ice. Looking around, there were clusters of white sea ice floating on the surface of the sea that was about to condense. The scene was quite spectacular. Xiao Qishi was already used to such scenes that would make humans gasp in amazement. It was as natural as returning to her hometown. He and Ao Daisai swam in the middle of this kind of floating ice and went to the ice that had already condensed. At this point, Ao Daisai suddenly changed the order in which he led. He swam back to Little Bear's back and gently pushed the little bear forward. Finally, he pushed the other party onto the ice. Oh yeah, the moment his butt touched the ice, Xiao Qishi couldn't help but cheer in his heart. He had achieved his goal of returning to the ice. Awesome. Xiao Qishi sat up wet and immediately put down the small yellow bucket on his head and breathed in the fresh air on the ice. Ah, Xiao Qiao's little bear was back. Then Ao Daisai also climbed up. The other party's action of shaking his head and draining the sea water on the ice was cool and neat. It was a sharp contrast to the soft little bear. If Xiao Qishi was too tired to stand, then Ao Daisai could do another 50 kilometers. The little polar bear was too lazy to get up and drain water. He rolled on the ice and let the sea ice absorb the sea water on his fur. Ao Daisai, who had this need, also found an open space to lie down. He quickly rolled twice and stood up to continue his journey. It was not safe here. The ice was too thin and there was no food. He rubbed the little bear, who was lying on the ground because of exhaustion and refused to walk, and patiently encouraged the other party to stand up because they had to go to a thicker ice layer. Xiao Qishi, it's up, it's up. It was snowing all the time, and there was no sun. Would the seal come up and wait for the polar bear to catch it? The new polar bear had doubts in his heart. He believed that there would be an answer to this question soon. The feeling of stepping on the ice was always so different. Thanks to the special structure of the polar bear's feet, they walked steadily on the ice and would not slip so easily. The little bear had not eaten for a week, and Ao Daisai was looking for food nonstop. Seeing the other party's anxious back and footsteps, Xiao Qishi was of course not unaware that he was secretly moved. If it weren't for himself, Ao Daisai should be able to hunt slowly. Ao Daisai's style was to be able to do it with ease. Yes, Ao Daisai couldn't wait to catch a seal and let the little bear, who had not eaten a seal for the whole summer, satisfy his hunger. Although he was very tired, Xiao Qishi was also very tired. From the moment he came ashore, he paid attention to the smell of food. But before he could smell the specific location of the seal, Ao Daisai had already smelled it. The first meal on shore was a ringed seal. There were a lot of these seals, and they were distributed all over the Arctic Circle. They were the polar bear's favorite food. Bright red blood dyed a large area of the snow red. The body of the seal that had just been killed was emitting white steam because its body temperature had not yet dissipated. Ao Daisai tore open the tough seal skin as soon as possible so that the little bear could eat warm food. Eating warm food in a world of ice and snow was undoubtedly the happiest time for polar bears. A ringed seal was not enough to fill two hungry polar bears. Little Bear was not greedy, so Ao Daisai could eat more than half of it. After eating the food that the little bear did not want to eat anymore, Ao Daisai deliberately touched the other party's nose, as if to say, "Little bastard, I have seen through your little trick, but I can't do anything about it." Xiao Qi Shi. Ahem. I've recently gotten used to the strange tone of my translation. Forget it, forget it. Anyway, it's fine. After eating a meal that was only half full, Xiao Qishi's physical strength was almost recovered, so the idea of going out to hunt alone became clearer and clearer. He raised his head and touched the nose of Ao Daisai, who was resting, trying to express his idea of going out with body language. However, Ao Daisai didn't seem to get it. The other party's beautiful eyes narrowed, and she lowered her head and licked him with a more intimate attitude. Annoying. It's like a chicken talking to a duck talking to a chicken. Xiao Qishi had no choice but to turn around and face the other party. Then he picked up the small yellow bucket and walked forward. After walking for a few minutes, Xiao Qishi turned back and found that Ao Daisai was following him. Knock. Can't you be more conscious and not be a stumbling block on my progress? How can you become a legendary polar bear like this? It's more like a useless bear. However, Xiao Qishi didn't care. He sped up and continued to walk. He decided that this time he would hunt alone. Because the little bear walked faster, Ao Daisai followed behind lazily, but it never had the intention to overtake the other party. Hiss, looking at this attitude, it was more or less like the attitude of Bao's mother walking her child downstairs. The only thing missing was an anti-loss bracelet in her hand. Xiao Qishi was a little excited because he smelled the scent of a seal nearby. After months of growth, he felt that he had a good grasp of the polar bear's navigator and locator. This location was definitely not far from a mark. In fact, it was indeed so. After walking for a short while, Xiao Qishi saw the traces of a seal from afar. The opportunity to practice hunting had come. The first step of Xiao Qishi's seal hunting was to place the small yellow bucket. The other polar bears didn't have this step, so the other polar bears entered hunting mode before him. Xiao Qishi had just placed the bucket and looked up. F***CK. He was the one who found the seal first. Shameless Ao Daisai. It was clearly quite far behind just now. How to catch up with him in one stride? Xiao Qishi stomped his feet. He was angry and anxious, but he didn't dare to make a sound. He was extremely manic. At this time, under his cute appearance, there were 10,000 grass mud horses hidden. As he ran, he shouted in his heart, Ao Daisai, let go of that seal and let me do it. Ao Daisai, who had entered hunting mode, ignored him. It was so shameless. Okay, no matter how angry Xiao Qishi was, he didn't dare to scare the seal away. He could only stop nearby, clench his teeth, and look ahead angrily. Okay, isn't it just a seal? In this part of the North Pole, three-legged snakes were hard to find, but ringed seals were everywhere. He just had to find another one. The process of hunting a seal was a little slow. It took at least 10 minutes. After Ao Daisai brought the seal ashore, he looked up and scanned the surroundings. He didn't find the little bear, but he wasn't in a hurry. The little bear's scent was nearby. Ao Daisai shook his body a little helplessly. He picked up the prey and chased the little rascal who was running all over the place. Logically speaking, the probability of hunting 3 seals in a short period of time was very low. Even if the European king was alive, it was a little unrealistic. Otherwise, the polar bears' lives wouldn't be so bleak. At least within a 5-kilometer radius, there shouldn't be any other seals. As for places that were too far away, there was no need. Xiao Qishi just wanted to hunt alone, not separate from Ao Daisai. Going too far away would hurt their relationship. It would burden the other party's thoughts. After Ao Daisai caught up with the little bear, he ate a seal that wasn't hot. It was his fault. Ao Daisai was speechless. He seemed to be very honest and didn't seem to blame him. After eating 2 seals in a row, today's activity came to an end. It was time to sleep again. Finding a spot that Ao Daisai liked, Xiao Qishi turned the small yellow bucket upside down on a pile of snow and slammed it down hard. This was a lesson learned with blood. Because Xiao Huang's physique was too light, if he didn't take any protective measures, he would easily roll away. Good night to the world, good night to the stars. Of course, there was also Ao Daisai and a kiss on the cheek goodnight. Before going to bed, Xiao Qishi decided to try again tomorrow. Tomorrow, he definitely wouldn't let Ao Daisai, this troublemaker, mess up his hunting plan. Murphy's Law. Worrying situations would always happen. After waking up, the little bear tried to hunt alone again. There was always a huge monster following behind him. Before encountering a seal, the other party would lazily follow him around. But once he encountered a seal, the other party would be one step ahead of him and kill the seal. There was no room for Little Bear to play at all. So it wasn't that Xiao Qishi wasn't motivated. It was mainly that this year's parents were dragging him down. They seriously hindered his progress. Sigh. Life wasn't easy. Little Bear was angry. Obviously, there was a phenomenon of tomorrow and tomorrow. However, Yolashanda never gave up the idea of independence. According to the GPS positioning provided by the rescue station, the research station learned that the two polar bears had successfully landed on the sea ice. In mid-November this year, the total area of the Arctic sea ice was more than 1 million square kilometers less than in previous years. At this rate, the ice in the Arctic may disappear completely in about 25 years. It had to be said that this was really a terrible prediction. It seemed that people's measures to deal with global warming could not be delayed. Otherwise, these animals that relied on the sea ice to live would be homeless. With the increase of sea ice, the other polar bears also returned to the ice one after another, actively hunting for food, replenishing their physical strength and fat, and preparing for next year's spring. The two polar bear teams also began to encounter other polar bears one after another. After a summer of hardship, the polar bears they encountered were pitifully thin. But it didn't matter. As long as they could hunt seals in the next 2 months, they would become round and fat again. For more than 2 months, although the little polar bear never found an opportunity to hunt a seal by himself, he was still full. His body and bones grew crazily during this period of time. Even when he slept at night, he felt that his legs were cramping. During the awkward period, polar bears were always thinner, and their faces were relatively pointy. Xiao Qishi was an exception. He was always a round-faced fat man, and he didn't lose weight because of his physical development. During this period, not only did the little polar bear's body change, but Ao Daisai's body also changed when he reached maturity. Ao Daisai was 5 years old. Spring was right in front of him. Perhaps he would become a father this spring, if he could find a female polar bear he liked. The crazy eating continued until mid-February, and there was a significant decline. At this time, Ao Daisai was tall and strong, more muscular than he was in the summer. Xiao Qishi thought that Ao Daisai was tired of eating fish and meat during this period of time. He was so excited that he wanted to show off his skills during this period of time. However, Otis led him deeper into the inner continent. What kind of activity was this? Why did he have to walk on land when he was having a good time on the ice? Xiao Qishi looked at the sea ice, which was rich in food, and then looked at Ao Daisai's back. It was torture. Should he follow or not? In the end, he thought about it and followed. Ao Daisai was an experienced adult bear, and he couldn't go wrong if he followed. At this time, Xiao Qishi didn't know that the breeding process of polar bears was like this. First, the male polar bear would wander around the whole continent, looking for a female. If he smelled something, he would track the other party's whereabouts. When two polar bears met, the female polar bear would lead the male polar bear to the highlands and find a higher, hidden place to mate. Usually, it was on the top of the mountain, so that it could be isolated from other polar bears. The scene of several male polar bears fighting over a female polar bear often happened in spring. In such a lively season, the research station that tracked them all year round naturally wouldn't miss it. It was still dark, and it was just the prelude to spring. The drone captured that Ao Daisai had stopped eating. This was inevitable, even if he had the task of feeding the young polar bear. At this moment, he still couldn't resist the need to breed and walked inland. The next step was to find a member of the opposite sex that he liked. Everything was within the researchers' expectations, except that Ao Daisai was still leading Yolashanda, and he didn't seem to want to leave her behind. Researchers, is he bringing the child to a blind date? With all due respect, The success rate may be very low. Very low. If A.O. Daisai wanted to successfully mate with a female polar bear, he had to temporarily leave Yulashanda behind. Otherwise, there was no chance. A.O. Daisai's desire to raise cubs, or the desire to breed, which side would win in the end? People who were paying attention to this matter were waiting to see. The shadow of the snow mountain was clearly visible on the land. Wasn't there only snow mountain there? If there were no accidents, this was the road to the snow mountain. What was A.O. Daisai doing? Xiao Qishi's mind was full of curiosity. He couldn't be blamed for temporarily forgetting about spring, because he didn't have such needs. To be honest, ever since he became a polar bear, Xiao Qishi hadn't thought about that. However, Xiao Qishi was soon forced to understand the truth. In the snow, he and A.O. Daisai were sleeping together in a leeward place. In a daze, Xiao Qishi felt that the source of heat in his body had left. He was used to sleeping with A.O. Daisai, so he immediately woke up. Did he have to get up and hurry? But he clearly remembered that he had just fallen asleep. The sleepy little polar bear raised its head and froze for a moment. This. He immediately closed his eyes and turned his head away. But after closing his eyes, his mind was still filled with the scene he had just seen. A.O. Daisai was sitting next to him with his legs crossed. Lowering his head and licking his own, Xiao Qishi shook his head, trying to get rid of the scene he had just seen. Don't think about it. But after calming down, he thought again. Oh, so polar bears are like this, so domineering. Little bear. Looking forward to the future, readers. Looking forward to the future. Chapter 34. Xiao Qishi was genuinely impressed by her friend's capabilities. She then realized that it was almost spring. No wonder Otis was behaving strangely. Not only did she bring him inland from the sea ice, but she also didn't sleep at night and was secretly doing shameful things. Although this was normal, Xiao Qishi still felt awkward. He didn't dare to turn around and look at A.O. Daisai. He also didn't dare to listen to the movements in his mind. However, the more he was afraid of something, the more likely it was to happen. Although the cold wind was howling outside, Xiao Qishi could still hear A.O. Daisai's voice clearly. Awkward, awkward, awkward. And A.O. Daisai's unusual breathing was invading the little bear's pure ears. Xiao Qishi felt that they should be separated for a period of time at such a special time. If he guessed correctly, A.O. Daisai had entered the reproductive agitation period. That was why he went inland to find a partner. This was not a problem. Men should get married when they are of age. The problem was that A.O. Daisai shouldn't have brought him along when he went ashore to find a wife. Animals were very sensitive to their surroundings when they were reproducing. They would never allow other animals to exist around them. Xiao Qishi didn't believe that his relationship with A.O. Daisai was so good that they could watch each other flirt. That was impossible, right? So after thinking about it, he could only conclude that A.O. Daisai was a newbie and had no experience. A cool bear experiencing the reproductive agitation period for the first time probably didn't know that the marriage market in the Arctic bear world was very cruel. According to a popular science video that Xiao Qishi happened to see, the sex ratio of polar bears was also very different. Usually, one female in heat was surrounded by several males. This was the law of nature. There were always more strong males who could survive in this harsh environment. These males had to defeat all the competitors to obtain the right to mate. A polar bear's duel would not stop there. Usually, they would be beaten until they were covered in scars or even badly mutilated. It could be said that it was very cruel. A.O. Daisai will be joining the competition in spring, and they will have to fight with the other competitors for mating rights. There was a high possibility of them getting injured. Xiao Qishi's embarrassment turned into worry in an instant. It couldn't be. A.O. Daisai was so strong and handsome. How could he meet someone who dared to steal his woman? What kind of competitor was that? But thinking about it, it wasn't impossible. After all, it was related to reproduction. The polar bears, who were usually very good at weighing the pros and cons, might be rash when it came to snatching a wife. Xiao Qishi was very worried. When he was worried, he couldn't help but turn a look at A.O. Daisai. Then, when he saw the A.O. Daisai, his eyes were stung by the spiciness. Damn, it had been so long, but she still hadn't recovered. Embarrassed, Chao Chi covered her eyes and thought, I will be older than you in the future. At this time, he originally wanted to leave Ao Daisai and go back to the ice to hunt, but because he was worried that Ao Daisai would get injured during the mating process, he gave up. Even if he couldn't help much, it was better than being worried about him every day after they separated. However, Chao Chi was very doubtful that Ao Daisai would be able to find a partner if he brought her along as a burden, of course. That was a matter for the future. The little bear buried its face deep in the snow and covered its ears with its paws. The problem now was #what should I do if my roommate is not done for a long time after gritting its teeth for about 10 minutes. The little polar bear stuck out its butt and wriggled on the snow, trying to get away from the huge polar bear that was in high spirits. Ao Daisai usually kept a close eye on him. Even the slightest movement could not be hidden from the other party. But now that Ao Daisai was comfortable, Chao Chi felt that if he secretly changed places to sleep, he would not disturb Ao Daisai. Unfortunately, he was wrong. Ridiculously wrong. Almost as soon as he moved half a meter away, Ao Daisai raised its head and stared at him with a pair of dark eyes, as if it was analyzing the meaning of his actions. Chao Chi, who had been paying attention to the other party, was dumbfounded. He looked innocently at Ao Daisai's face, which was not indulging in comfort at all, and then involuntarily moved down to look at the proud little Ao Daisai, who was still so energetic in the minus dozens of degrees Celsius. Chao Chi-Chi's tongue was cold. He didn't know when he opened his mouth. He only came back to his senses when the cold wind blew into his mouth. The next second, the little bear closed his mouth and then pounced into the snow like a hungry dog. Ah, so embarrassing. It was so embarrassing that he could dig out a basketball court with his toes. He could even set up a spectator stand. However, there was a reason why Chao Chi was so embarrassed. Just now, Chao Chi wondered if she was hallucinating. She realized that when she stared at little Otis, Otis's posture had become much more arrogant. She was not sure if it was because she was sleeping soundly, but when she stared at little Otis, Otis's posture had become much more arrogant. This was why he opened his mouth to eat the wind in a daze. He was surprised. Just when Chao Chi felt that the heat on his body could melt 9 million square kilometers of glaciers, he heard Ao Daisai get up. The other party did not care about the proud little Ao Daisai. Instead, he walked towards him. Oh, what does the other party want to do? The little polar bear was very nervous. Could it be that male polar bears in heat would be unhappy even if they were disturbed? But he didn't do it on purpose. Ao Daisai walked to the little bear's side and did not do anything. He just arched the little bear out of the snow pile, then picked him up by the back of his neck and dragged him back to the place where he was sleeping. The strict Ao Daisai felt that this was the best place to sleep. Chao Chi was caught sneaking away. He curled his claws and did not dare to move at all. This was because he was keenly aware that Ao Daisai was different from usual at this moment. If the usual Ao Daisai noticed that he was being naughty, he would definitely coax him patiently. At this moment, Otis was so simple and violent. He was giving off an oppressive vibe. Little Bear tried to translate his words to Otis, which meant, Little Bear, don't provoke me. I'm feeling very uncomfortable now. Chao Chi, even Chao Chi did not know why. Recently, when he translated Ao Daisai's body language, it was as if he was possessed by the CEO. Bang! Little Bear was picked up by Ao Chi and returned to his original position. He did not resist and just lay there obediently. Ao Daisai's current situation should be quite uncomfortable. Chao Chi had thought wrongly just now. Ao Daisai was not human. How could this kind of thing be comfortable? There was no way for him to vent. He should be very uncomfortable. In fact, this was indeed the case. Half an hour ago, this newly matured male polar bear experienced his first agitation. Of course, it was not appropriate to describe Ao Daisai as a small lipstick. The polar bear's size was there, and its color was darker. Therefore, it was very conspicuous next to its white fur. That was why Chao Chi could see it at a glance in the dark. It was not only because his night vision was good, but also because Ao Daisai was full. Then it was a strong presence. Only a blind person would not be able to see it. Just as Xiao Qishi thought, this kind of thing actually did not bring Ao Daisai a happy mood. The restlessness of the breeding season was like a ball of fire crashing in the male polar bear's body. This kind of situation only made Ao Daisai feel irritated and unable to sleep. Therefore, he, who usually coaxed Little Bear, could only be silent at this moment and focus more on his own abnormality. After putting Xiao Qishi down, Ao Daisai also slowly lay down beside him. His breath was hotter than usual, forming clouds of white gas in the world of ice and snow. The frequency of his exhalation seemed to make Xiao Qishi very worried. But in this situation, he did not even dare to move, let alone raise his head and rub Ao Daisai. Ao Daisai's dark and quiet eyes met the little bear's worried round eyes. As if he had found some of his old gentleness, he lowered his head and licked the other party's nose with a hint of comfort and apology. Xiao Qishi silently translated in his heart, "I can't play with you now. You should sleep, little bear." However, in Ao Daisai's situation, Xiao Qishi, who was worried about him, did not feel sleepy at all. Even if he closed his eyes temporarily under Ao Daisai's gaze, he quickly opened them again. A pair of big eyes looked at Ao Daisai's handsome face. Seeing that the little polar bear was awake again, Ao Daisai narrowed his eyes. It was just a slight expression, but Xiao Qishi read the warning on his face. He did not know what Ao Daisai was warning him about, but Xiao Qishi sensed danger. So he quickly closed his eyes obediently. While he was preparing to sleep, he still pricked up his ears and paid attention to Ao Daisai's unusual breathing rate. How uncomfortable is this? I hope he gets better soon. After an unknown amount of time, Xiao Qishi finally felt sleepy. However, just as he was about to hug Xiao Qishi in a daze, he heard Ao Daisai's voice again. At the same time, there was a slightly suppressed whisper that flowed out from the other party's throat from time to time. Xiao Qishi heard a hint of irritation and restraint. In the dim, snowy sky, the little polar bear's eyes were as big as copper bells, and he stared intently for a long time. It was difficult for Ao Daisai not to notice him. Their eyes met, two pairs of eyes that looked almost the same. The small pair was innocent, and the big pair was mature and calm. Xiao Qishi was caught peeking instead of sleeping again. He was embarrassed and a little scared. Ao Daisai's eyes made his hair stand on end. He thought about it and buried his head in the snow. Snow escape. However, the little polar bear's snow escape could only be called self-deception. Although his face was buried, his whole body was still exposed. After being interrupted by the little bear again and again, Ao Daisai didn't seem to have any intention of continuing. He directly ignored the strangeness of his body and just lay down as usual. He even licked the snow around his mouth to quench his thirst and cool himself down. There was no movement for a long time. The little polar bear breathed a sigh of relief. Only then did he dare to raise his head and found that Ao Daisai was lying on the snow beside him. It seemed that the situation was better, but he didn't think about it. If Ao Daisai was better, how could he not hug and kiss him? Under the wrong judgment, Xiao Qishi slowly crawled into Ao Daisai's arms. In a world of ice and snow, he couldn't sleep soundly without some heat, and he didn't want Ao Daisai to think that he was a little ungrateful wolf. It was obvious that his little friend was going through painful things, but he didn't care and could even fall asleep. That was really wrong. He wasn't such a bear. Ao Daisai looked at the little bear approaching him and didn't happily hug and lick him as usual. He raised his face and shook off the snowflakes that had just fallen on his head, breathing out clouds of white air from his nose. Still from this action, Xiao Qishi could see that the other party was still very uncomfortable. His heart ached. He raised his paw and wanted to touch Ao Daisai's face, but Ao Daisai suddenly turned over and pressed him into his arms. At first, he was just motionless. Xiao Qishi was covered in such an airtight cover. He only felt that the temperature around him had risen by more than 10 degrees. It was very warm. The cold wind outside couldn't blow him at all. It was all blocked by Ao Daisai's tall body. Suddenly, Ao Daisai made a very small movement. Although it was very small, Xiao Qishi's head still buzzed. The whole bear was a little confused. What was Ao Daisai doing? As if to clear the little bear's confusion, Ao Daisai rubbed against him twice. This time, not only Xiao Qishi, even little Huang, who was nearby, knew what Ao Daisai was doing. Xiao Qishi. Knock. A layer of anger rose in his eyes, and his heart collapsed. Ah, damn hooligan, Ao Daisai. Let go of this innocent little bear. He knew that he was handsome, had a good figure, and his fur was as white as snow. There were not many polar bears in the Arctic who could compare to him. Ao Daisai just happened to be in need of a hooligan, but he couldn't look for him. How annoying. Xiao Qishi, who was willing to sacrifice himself for his brother, didn't want to be his brother's tool. He struggled with all his might, but he forgot that there was a huge difference in strength between them. It was very difficult to fight back. Ao Daisai rubbed against him again. Sure enough, all men were the same. Xiao Qishi cried out twice to express his dissatisfaction. He hoped that Ao Daisai wouldn't be like this. Then, Ao Daisai also replied with two sounds. It was full of suppression, irritation, and forbearance. These were all normal. The most amazing thing was that Xiao Qishi even translated a coquettish action that he was very familiar with, acting coquettishly. Ao Daisai's voice was mixed with a certain hidden meaning. The general idea was, I know you are very angry, but bear with it for my sake. Don't fall out with me. Xiao Qishi froze. He raised his head and wanted to roar against the wind. Ao Daisai, what are you saying? How can I tolerate this kind of thing? Speaking of which, just watching the other party pleasing him was already very shy and awkward, not to mention that he was also forced to participate. Xiao Qishi was different from animals who only relied on their instincts to survive. He was rich in emotions and had a human mind. Coupled with his sharp senses, he could think a lot. His sense of shame and conservativeness didn't disappear just because he had been a polar bear for almost a year. However, when Xiao Qishi clearly received Ao Daisai's call for help in those rich and diverse emotions, he couldn't get angry at all. After being together for a long time, they already had a deep emotional bond. Forget it, forget it. After gritting his teeth and thinking about it, Xiao Qishi closed his eyes and couldn't be bothered to struggle anymore. Anyway, whether he struggled or not, Ao Daisai wouldn't stop. Moreover, after sensing his docility, it seemed to be getting more and more intense. If this could make the other party less manic and uncomfortable, Xiao Qishi could continue to endure. Boo-hoo! When Ao Daisai went too far and was on the verge of losing control, Xiao Qishi would use crying to attract the other party's attention. Every time he cried, the other party would temporarily restrain itself and even slow down to kiss his face to comfort him. In the snow, Ao Daisai's breathing seemed to cover the sound of the wind and snow. It was very clear and thick. The little polar bear pressed in his arms couldn't feel the coldness of the Arctic, but correspondingly, it had to endure an unusual temperature and confinement. The little polar bear was always on edge, afraid that something would happen. After all, he could only accept being rubbed by Ao Daisai, which was the maximum limit. Boo-hoo! The scheming little polar bear kept reminding Ao Daisai with a weak voice that he was still a young little bear. Please be sure to take good care of him. Ao Daisai's eyes were deep and slowly narrowed until they almost became a line. This was an expression that only appeared after holding the little polar bear. It could be called comfort. It was in sharp contrast to the fidgety and uncomfortable look from before. Maybe he was no longer uncomfortable now. After careful observation, the atmosphere that lingered around him just now had been swept away. Xiao Qishi breathed a sigh of relief. Until he accompanied Ao Daisai through this difficult period of agitation, his nerves were tense. Little Bear didn't know how long it had been since the beginning. He only knew that his paws that were motionless in the snow were almost stiff. Xiao Qishi, who wanted to try to leave Ao Daisai's confinement, struggled for a while. This movement attracted the attention of Ao Daisai, who was resting. Ao Daisai, who had just recovered his comfortable state, seemed to be in a good mood. He opened his eyes that had returned to calmness and made a low sound, as if responding to the little polar bear. From his lazy voice, Xiao Qishi understood. Don't move, let's hug for a while. Yeah. Xiao Qishi's eyes widened, and she was angry. What the hell? He had already sacrificed his white and handsome self to become the object of the other party's fantasies. At this time, he was still responsible for waiting for the aftertaste to pass. That seemed to be the case. Although the flame that was raging in his body had been extinguished, Ao Daisai still liked to hug the cute little bear. After resting for a while and regaining some energy, he immediately cleaned the little bear from head to toe with more enthusiasm than before, especially the hair that he had dirted. He cleaned it very carefully. After experiencing that embarrassing thing, Xiao Qishi didn't want to accept this kind of intimate action. It was very awkward, but he could not clean it. Boo-hoo, I'm dirty. Xiao Qishi tilted her head and looked up at the starry sky with mixed feelings. Xiao Qishi seriously thought that if this kind of thing happened again, he would break up and run away from home. When the time came, Ao Daisai would go to the snow mountain to find Ao Daisai's partner, and he would go back to the ice to hunt his seals. They would meet again after Ao Daisai's breeding season. Thinking about these things and being comforted by Ao Daisai, the little bear, who was tired for most of the night, gradually fell asleep. Ao Daisai occasionally raised his head from cleaning and stared at the little bear's sleeping side face. After a few seconds, he lowered his head again and carefully licked the hair that he hadn't licked yet. The reason why the little polar bear could remain so white was because of Ao Daisai. After finishing the cleaning, Ao Daisai rested, but it seemed that he couldn't sleep. He turned his head and rubbed the little bear's face with his nose. He wanted to play with the little bear. Unfortunately, the other party was sleeping, so this king of ice who couldn't sleep after the incident could only move gently without waking the other party up. He wanted to satisfy this little need for gentle interaction. The author has something to say. I hope the comment will be as serious as an academic discussion as always. Serious face in _n. Chapter 35. Every researcher in the research station knew that when a pair of wild polar bears reproduced, the larger male polar bear may cause harm to the smaller female polar bear. This was not just a problem of the size difference between the two sides. There was also the problem of mating duration. Generally speaking, the larger and fiercer the animal was, the shorter their mating time was. However, the polar bear's mating time was surprisingly long. Their mating time was up to half an hour on average. There was once a researcher who followed a pair of breeding polar bears. They mated for more than 60 minutes on top of a secluded snowy mountain. It could be seen that the duration varied from bear to bear. A domineering male polar bear would repeatedly court the female polar bear to increase the chances of the female polar bear becoming pregnant. During this period, not only the female polar bear was at risk of being crushed, but the male polar bear was also at risk of being injured. The male polar bear's reproductive organ was completely different from that of humans. They had a fragile bone that was more than 10 centimeters long. With environmental pollution and changes, some polar bears that were not so physically strong had a greater risk of fracture during reproduction. Of course, the male polar bear that could last for more than 60 minutes had a very small chance of fracture. After it confirmed that the female polar bear with it was most likely pregnant, it would leave the other party and look for other female polar bears. Perhaps they would meet 3 to 5 times in a breeding season. In short, the two sides would never have feelings of nostalgia and love. Like Ao Daisai, after releasing on the little bear, he calmed down and wanted to be intimate with the little bear. This was an abnormal behavior. Perhaps it was because in Ao Daisai's heart, even if there was no unfamiliar restlessness, he would still be obedient and loving to the little bear. This seemed to have nothing to do with estrus. On the snowy night of the accident, Ao Daisai did not sleep at all. Because spring was coming, even if it was temporarily relieved once. But there was still the whole breeding season waiting for him. As for why it entered the warm-up period in advance, it was probably because A.O. Daisai's quality of life was good. Oh no, it was good physical fitness. Just like humans, boys who were also in puberty, but their development was uneven. Genetic advantage and acquired conditions determined fate. This was the reason why female polar bears would choose strong males as the father of their children. A.O. Daisai's genes should be very good, and so was Yulashanda. Growing up in a good environment, he looked bigger than the little bear of the same age. It was not only because of his fat, but also because of his excellent bones. Although all polar bears looked the same to humans, in fact, polar bears were very clear about the differences in strength and appearance between polar bears. For example, Xiaoqishi thought that A.O. Daisai was very handsome, and no polar bear in the Arctic Circle could compare to him. Similarly, in A.O. Daisai's eyes, the little bear that he picked up was the cutest thing in the world. He didn't want anyone else but this one. The optimistic Xiaoqishi quickly forgot about what happened last night the moment she woke up. After all, it was just a normal physiological problem that animals could not control. It was not A.O. Daisai's fault. When she woke up, she found that A.O. Daisai was also awake and looking at her gently. How could he know that A.O. Daisai was tortured by his first menstrual period and did not sleep at all? Little Bear, who did not hold any grudges, used his head to nudge A.O. Daisai's chin. He even wanted to shrink into A.O. Daisai's arms and sleep soundly. He was not an adult, and he was not looking for a wife. Why did he wake him up to hurry? It was funny. Little Bear, who was cold in the wind, shrank into A.O. Daisai's arms and closed his eyes for half an hour. He could not stand the condemnation of his conscience. 1, 2, 3, ha, get up. He stretched his back and stretched his muscles, then yawned loudly and shook his head. It was still snowing, and the wind was quite strong. In order to find a wife for A.O. Daisai, Little Bear was duty-bound. A.O. Daisai also shook his fur. Snowflakes fell on his eyelashes, and there was an unexpected kind of gentleness. Xiaoqishi, who was infatuated with his brother every day, had only seen it about 10 times. The two figures, one big and one small, continued to move towards the snow mountain. There were many young polar bears on the road like them, but few polar bears had such a clear goal like A.O. Daisai. They went straight to the top of the mountain from the beginning, instead of showing off their charm first. This was a very strange move. How could they reproduce in spring without a partner? In this busy season, researchers were destined to invest a lot of manpower and material resources to follow the most mysterious and important side of animals. Aerial photography and land-walking cameras could no longer meet the demand. Researchers had to carry machines to the scene to track animals in person. Only then could they take more quality pictures. The object that people wanted to record the most this year was undoubtedly A.O. Daisai, who took Little Bear to a blind date. There were too many things that people wanted to know about this outstanding and handsome polar bear, as well as many long-cherished wishes from humans. For example, they hoped that A.O. Daisai, who liked cubs, could become a father this year and have a child of his own. However, people could not help but worry that if A.O. Daisai had his own cubs, would he still treat Yulashanda the same as before? This was a very realistic problem. After paying attention to the two polar bears for so long, the last thing people wanted to see was them go their separate ways. There was a fierce competition in the research station about which tracking team to send to film A.O. Daisai's spring trip, because this was obviously an opportunity that was worth fighting for. Everyone was red in the face from the competition. It was a pity that they could not ask Yulashanda what color of sack she liked. Otherwise, it would be great to let Yulashanda choose. Wait a minute. The secret of A.O. Daisai's reproduction seemed to have nothing to do with Yulashanda. Perhaps they were used to the two of them being together all the time, and A.O. Daisai would never have any objections to Yulashanda's decision. In the end, the teams drew lots to determine the winner. A lucky team was given the opportunity to film A.O. Daisai's spring trip, and if there were no accidents, they could also film the cute third wheel Yulashanda. People had high expectations for this operation. Little Shirtu would also be brought along for this operation. One had to know that it was very difficult to film wild animals, and all kinds of equipment were needed. In addition to the difficulty, there was also danger. Wildlife photographers who could take up the post must have extremely strong physical and psychological qualities. Needless to say, their professional abilities were even more important. Frames after frames of amazing scenes were all created by them. The other teams that didn't draw AO Daisai didn't relax either. They actively prepared themselves and went to the area that the other teams were responsible for with full enthusiasm to follow and film the animals that they were responsible for. The breeding season was coming, and the animals that were recorded were not only polar bears, but also other animals, such as the mysterious Arctic wolf, the Arctic fox that liked to whine, and so on. The lucky team landed near the target and was quickly asked by their colleagues if they had seen AO Daisai and Yulashanda. Were they still together? Team leader of the photography team, we just landed. According to the positioning system, they are together. Colleague of the other team, we landed for half a day. It's good to have the positioning system. We haven't seen any traces of the wolf pack yet. Team leader of the photography team, good luck. Filming the wolf pack was even more difficult. He guessed that his dear colleagues were squatting on a high ground, waiting for the wolf pack to pass by. Compared to the Arctic wolf, who was very resistant and vigilant to the scent of humans, the polar bears, who were the overlords of the ice, didn't seem to care at all. This made people feel that they were being despised, but at the same time, they also had to thank the other party. The fearless polar bears were very experienced, except for breeding, and didn't want to be disturbed. The photography team was very cautious. They didn't rashly approach the polar bears just because they didn't care. In a long distance, AO Daisai and Yulashanda, who were slowly moving forward, appeared. Among them, Yulashanda's yellow bucket was very eye-catching. The photographer in front of the camera smiled knowingly. Oh, Yulashanda's yellow bucket really blocks the wind and rain. Walking in the snow, they looked leisurely and comfortable, in sharp contrast to the people who wore thick wool hats and gloves. Some photographers refused to wear gloves because they wanted to feel better. This required a lot of courage. After shooting the long distance, they were about to shoot the closer shots, focusing on the scene where the two polar bears stopped to rest. AO Daisai and Yulashanda always got along differently. The staff in the research station knew that they liked to hug each other to sleep, even in the very hot summer. 8 hours later, the whole team hid in the vicinity. The leader of the photography team recorded a voice message. 8 hours after following AO Daisai and Yulashanda, they chose a leeward position and seemed to be planning to sleep. After thinking for a while, he said, Yulashanda put the yellow bucket upside down in the snow before sleeping and even patted it a few times. I have to say that his bucket is really sturdy. Next, AO Daisai used his huge body to block the wind and snow for Yulashanda. How doting. After being a wildlife photographer for so long, it wasn't that the leader had never shot a heartwarming scene, but seeing the two polar bears in front of him always made him feel happy. The other members of the team were whispering and laughing about the sleeping AO Daisai and Yulashanda. Someone even joked in the tent, "Why don't we team up in the middle of the night to steal Yulashanda's bucket? What do you think?" Team member Ben quickly shook his head and said, "No, I'm afraid of being patted on the head by AO Daisai." Team member Ella's face was full of excitement. "Hey, we're not far from Yulashanda. This is a magical experience, don't you think?" No one had any objections to this point, and they all agreed. Soon, they were called out by the leader through the radio. Something must have happened, as he sounded a little anxious, so the team members immediately prepared to go. When they reached the equipment, they understood the reason for the leader's anxiousness. At this moment, it wasn't just the people who were shocked. At the same time, Yulashanda was also shocked. 2 minutes ago, Chow Chishi said good night to all the little cuties, including the high-quality yellow bucket. Then he found a comfortable position in AO Daisai's arms. He closed his eyes and prepared to sleep. AO Daisai also finished saying goodnight to Little Bear. He licked his paws, but narrowed his beautiful eyes and didn't intend to sleep. Because he wasn't very sleepy, and he was upset. This kind of unhappy mood and exuberant energy made Ao Daisai too lazy to care about the nearby, peeping humans. Generally speaking, as long as there was no malicious intent, polar bears in a relaxed state would sometimes even poke their heads out to look at the humans who were filming. Of course, to chase them away, they only needed to throw a snowball. Feeling that Ao Daisai's breathing rhythm was disrupted, the little polar bear shook his ears, and a thought rose in his heart. No way, help. Ao Daisai can't be thinking of doing something bad again, right? The little bear in Ao Daisai's arms froze. He stayed in fear for 2 minutes, and then his guess was confirmed. He first felt pain in the tip of his ear. The bastard Ao Daisai was using the strength to torture bears to bite his ear. 2 cute ears, taking turns to be persecuted. Oh, little bear's mouth overflowed with dissatisfaction and discomfort. But it was useless. Next, he was bitten several times on his face, neck, and other places that could be bitten. During this period, Ao Daisai's breathing became more and more rapid, and the frequency of 9 short breaths and 1 long breath made the little bear's scalp tingle. He almost didn't think about it, got up, and rushed out. No, he didn't want to be Ao Daisai's tool bear. Goodbye. Polar bears have a characteristic, that is, no matter what runs in front of them, they will chase after it. Ao Daisai held Xiao Qishi back in his mouth, not out of the nature of a polar bear, but out of his unnatural love for this little bear. The moment Xiao Qishi felt pain in the back of his neck, he felt a huge monster covering him. Damn. Unsurprisingly, the tragedy of the snowy night 2 days ago happened again. The difference was that this time, Ao Daisai didn't even have the prelude to pleasuring himself and directly sought relief from him. Xiao Qishi was numb. Oh, what's going on? 2 days ago, he vowed that if there was a next time, he would run away from home. However, at this moment, he was pressed down by Ao Daisai in the snow and couldn't move, but he couldn't bear to bite Ao Daisai's forearm. He believed that with his strength, this bite would definitely draw blood. But Xiao Qishi found that he couldn't do it at all. Other than cursing a few times, his heart was still on Ao Daisai's side. Even if he didn't like it, Xiao Qishi still thought that Ao Daisai wasn't human, and the other party didn't know that this was wrong. But he didn't understand why Ao Daisai would dawdle with his little friend who ate and lived with him every day. Polar bears shouldn't have the concept of compromise. In fact, even if 2 polar bears were in their breeding period, it wasn't easy for them to compete with each other. The male had to like the female, and the female had to like the male. Only then could the 2 enter the next step. Thinking about it this way, it meant that Ao Daisai liked him. Xiao Qishi's eyes widened, and he was shocked by the conclusion that he had deduced. He swallowed his saliva and felt that it shouldn't be possible. Maybe the other party just felt uncomfortable and wanted peace. Little Bear was in a state of shock and doubt, and he had no choice but to lie down docilely. The strong Ao Daisai covered the little bear from top to bottom and rubbed against him more and more fiercely. Unlike the slightly coarse hair of adult polar bears, the little bear's hair was fluffy and soft, and it was well maintained. The close enough distance allowed Xiao Qishi to clearly map out some images. After all, he had seen it before, so it was easier to imagine it. Shame. The scorching temperature, in contrast to the cold air of the Arctic, always made him feel like his back was about to melt. If he was a block of ice now, then Ao Daisai was a ball of fire. Ice couldn't extinguish fire, but fire could slowly melt ice. Even if Xiao Qishi knew that Ao Daisai wouldn't hurt him, he couldn't help but tremble in such a scene. Woo-woo. In the face of fear, the little polar bear made a weak sound to the powerful Ao Daisai. This sound gently cut through the silence of the snowy night and fell in Ao Daisai's heart like a feather. Ao Daisai, who loved him, obviously didn't lose his mind. Ao Daisai would be gentler in order to appease him and not scare him. But this would last for a longer time. In the end, Xiao Qishi gritted his teeth and decided that no matter how fierce Ao Daisai was, he wouldn't make a sound. After all, He wanted to go over quickly. Go over quickly. The people who were filming nearby could only see Ao Daisai's back, while the little bear was completely blocked by the other party and couldn't spy on him. People could only know that Ao Daisai's target was Yelashanda. But how was that possible? Yelashanda was not only a male polar bear, but he was also only 2.5 years old. He hadn't reached maturity at all, so how could he be the target of Ao Daisai's estrus? In other words, even if Ao Daisai did become restless and Yelashanda happened to be next to him, they couldn't have any thoughts about each other. The most normal reaction would be for Ao Daisai to leave alone, without eating or drinking, to search for females overnight. In the following breeding season, he would vent his exuberant energy to his heart's content. But now, the cute combination that people had always thought of as a great friendship didn't seem to be as simple as friendship. At least, Ao Daisai didn't treat Yelashanda that way. After an unknown amount of time, Xiao Qishi felt that his 4 limbs, which were pressed into the snow, were almost stiff, and his body was suffused with a kind of soreness that came from maintaining the same posture for a long time. Ao Daisai, who was on his back, finally regained his composure. It was dirty, and it wasn't as simple as its fur. Xiao Qishi swore that he would take a good bath in the snow later. Once it stopped, the atmosphere that made Xiao Qishi tremble just now was swept away. Ao Daisai's gaze also returned to being gentle, and it was no longer as domineering and unreasonable as before. It immediately lowered its head and licked Xiao Qishi's face in an apologetic manner. Such a gentle giant was brimming with undisguised affection. Its attitude could be said to be a little indulgent. Xiao Qishi, who had already suspected that something was wrong with Ao Daisai, suddenly met the other party's affectionate gaze. He was stunned, and then his heart skipped a beat. It can't be Ao Daisai. This kind of gaze made him, who was being watched, feel like he was being loved. Of course, Xiao Qishi had always known that Ao Daisai loved him, but he didn't know that it was love. Xiao Qishi was stunned, and he was instantly shocked by his intuition. Because of the combination of human thinking and the sensitivity of polar bears, and the accident that happened in the past 2 nights, he could only interpret in one direction. Ao Daisai liked him. Faced with this answer, Xiao Qishi was stunned for about half a minute. Finally, he regained his ability to think. No, that's impossible. How could a polar bear like another polar bear? Xiao Qishi wasn't referring to the love between friends, but the love that came with love. The polar bear's desire would only appear during the breeding season, but he felt that Ao Daisai didn't seem to be affected by the breeding season. The arrival of the breeding season just made him do one more thing, and this thing was to let the slow little bear know that the other party was obedient to him and treated him like an ancestor. It wasn't because of fatherly love, and it wasn't because of friendship. It was another kind of inconceivable love. Xiao Qishi's entire bear fell into confusion after deducing this result. If it was true, this was too unbelievable. Did Ao Daisai have love? If it was another polar bear, Xiao Qishi might be suspicious, but if it was the smart Ao Daisai, Xiao Qishi had mixed feelings. If Ao Daisai was a human, it would definitely be a heartthrob. Ao Daisai's feelings were rich and delicate, and it had a very good ability to express itself. It was indeed very likely that it had love. However, Xiao Qishi was still very shocked. Since the day he became a polar bear, he was prepared to spend the rest of his life alone and without love. Anyway, even if he didn't become a polar bear, it was very likely that he wouldn't have love. Being in love wasn't a necessity. However, he didn't expect that after being a polar bear for a year, a relationship problem would appear out of thin air. Hashtag, what should I do if a male polar bear has a crush on me? I'm also a polar bear, I'm also a male, and I'm underage, hashtag, just like that. Xiao Qishi fell into his own world. His mind was filled with the truth that he had just learned. On the side, Ao Daisai was carefully cleaning the little bear's hair. His movements were gentle and careful. Almost every half a minute, he would look up at the little bear's face. Although he couldn't speak, his eyes were full of thoughts. Did polar bears have love? At least it seemed that A.O. Daisai had love, but he couldn't say it out loud, and it could never be scientifically proven. That was love. The author has something to say. Dear excellent researchers, this is today's topic. Please submit an opinion of at least 25 words later. Meeting adjourned. Chapter 36. Xiao Qixi did not know how long she had been in a daze before she finally regained her senses. Just now, she was completely focused on the fact that Otis had feelings for her, which surprised her. His sensory ability to the outside world had obviously decreased. Now that he pulled his thoughts back to reality, he smelled a faint, fishy smell in the air. Even though A.O. Daisai had cleaned up most of the smell, the polar bear's amazing sense of smell could still smell a little bit. Xiao Qixi mind, which had calmed down a little, was once again in a mess. He did not know what to say. This was not the first time that A.O. Daisai had touched him. Of course, he knew that it was the polar bear's smell. Little Bear, who was so embarrassed that even his toes curled up, told himself to hold his breath and not breathe in. Even if he breathed in, he did not pay attention to the indescribable smell in the air. However, sometimes, the more you forbid yourself from doing something, the more likely it was that you would lose control. In the end, Little Bear could not control his nose and tried to distinguish the smell in the air. Then, he could not distinguish it. He smelled another smell, and this smell was super familiar. It was coffee. He was shocked. How could there be the smell of coffee in the snow of the Arctic Circle? Little Bear, who was immediately attracted by the smell, got up from A.O. Daisai's arms. He rested his chin on A.O. Daisai's back and blinked his round eyes as he looked in the direction of the smell. It smelled so good. The first thing that came to Little Bear's mind was that the coffee was delicious and he had not had it in a long time. Then, he thought of the most important question. If there was the smell of coffee here, it meant that there were humans here. He just did not know who they were. A scientific research team or an animal research team. Thinking of this, Xiao Qixi suddenly froze. Because he was now an animal. Damn, could it be a documentary team? Thinking about the fake stone camera and the GPS location that was in the hands of the rescue station, he felt that he and A.O. Daisai were the main characters of the documentary. Xiao Qixi was petrified on the spot. There was only one thought in his mind. This could not be an animal documentary team. If that was the case, then he might have to kill them to silence them. Otherwise, this matter would not be settled peacefully. Of course, that was just a joke. It was an exaggeration to express his current violent mood. First of all, they had to confirm if those people were filming a documentary. This was not difficult. They just had to get closer to take a look. It wasn't that Xiao Qixi didn't think that they were a bunch of bad guys, but his senses told him that they didn't have any ill intentions. They didn't seem like poachers either. If they were poachers, the other party would have had the chance to attack long ago. Moreover, A.O. Daisai had suffered from poachers before, so he should be more sensitive to danger. In short, Xiao Qixi was very concerned about whether the other party was filming him and A.O. Ki, so he decided to take a look. Little Bear climbed over his back, and A.O. Daisai, who had not finished cleaning up, immediately followed. When he realized that the little bear was moving towards the humans, he bit the back of the little bear's neck and refused to let it go. At the same time, he let out a low warning sound from his throat. Xiao Qixi translated the meaning. Don't go, it's dangerous. Through this experience, he was surprised to find that A.O. Daisai could lie. First, if there was really danger, A.O. Daisai wouldn't have been so focused on him just now. He would have taken him away long ago. Second, if there was really danger, there were many opportunities to leave afterward. However, A.O. Daisai stayed firmly in the sacred place that he had found after searching for a long time. It was as if those humans weren't enough for him to get up and find another place to sleep. Boo-hoo! A.O. Daisai could lie, but couldn't he fake cry? A.O. Daisai looked at the little bear who was rolling on the ground with his limbs in the air. He looked a little confused and helpless. As a young polar bear, in his knowledge, there was no concept of a drama queen for the time being. Those humans really didn't have any ill intentions. A.O. Daisai warned the little bear that it was dangerous, but he didn't want the little bear to come into contact with humans. He had been hurt by humans and received help from them. He didn't have any prejudice in his heart, but he didn't want to be associated with humans. How could Aodicei resist little bear's coquettish behavior in the snow? Even if he encountered such a situation, he would comfort the little bear immediately or find food to feed him. Not to mention that he and little bear had just made love in the snow. At this moment, even if the little bear bit Aodicei into a bloody mess, he probably wouldn't frown, let alone satisfy his curiosity. Xiaoqishi felt Aodicei gently rubbing his belly. At the same time, Aodicei made a sound from his throat that said, "I can't do anything to you." He stopped crying immediately. Not only did he stop crying, but he also got up quickly. The chubby figure followed the aroma of coffee and walked over with small steps, curious and vigilant. Aodicei's every step was equivalent to 3 or 4 steps of little bear. But at this time, he could only follow patiently, like a bodyguard. At this time, the camera team had been in a daze for a long time because of the scene they had just seen. About half an hour had passed from the moment they saw Aodicei stepping on little bear's back to the moment it ended, but they still hadn't digested the news. The English language was poor, and there were only a few words that they could use to express their surprise. In private, they had said it to each other countless times. Over and over again, it was unbelievable. Now, the 2 polar bears who had just finished their intimate act were walking towards the camera. Oh no, they found us. The whole team began to cover their mouths and reflect on themselves. They must have spoken too loudly just now and attracted the attention of the 2 polar bears. "Captain, should we go?" A team member lowered his voice and asked nervously. It's hard to choose. The captain had been looking at the camera and shook his head. The reason why he said this was because Mrs. Yolashanda was too cute in the camera. Since she was lying on Aodicei's back and looking at them, he had been hogging the camera. Originally, they had a chance to leave, or at least return to the off-road vehicle. However, Alisanda's cute little steps and sneaky little expressions attracted the captain's attention. His heart almost melted. Alisanda is so cute. He's obviously curious about us, but he's afraid of danger. That's why he's walking over step by step, just like a feline on the hunt. On a hunt. The team member was terrified. "Captain, you stay here. We'll go back first." "Coward! I heard that Yolashanda is very friendly to humans." The captain said, "What's the use of Yolashanda being friendly? The key is Aodicei. Don't forget that he is in an agitated state, so he should be quite unfriendly." The team member reminded him helplessly, but he just finished enjoying himself. The captain's tricky words made it impossible to refute. Perhaps this was the adventurous spirit that the captain of the gold medal team should have. The captain was not blindly confident. He carefully looked at the state of Aodicei. This big guy that had just finished enjoying himself was looking at Yolashanda gently and had no time to pay attention to humans. When Xiaoqishi walked closer and closer, he saw the camera equipment with his good eyesight. He couldn't believe it. Was it really the camera team that shot the animal documentary? This was undeniably bad news. In addition to feeling embarrassed, Xiaoqishi also felt very sorry. In the end, he still gave the country unreliable data. The point is, can you delete it? Please go and record some serious polar bears. I beg of you. Xiaoqishi thought. From old to young, neither of them was serious. On the camera team's side, the little polar bear suddenly stood up and made a scene at Aodicei and no longer walked forward. The behemoth that was guarding the little polar bear stood calmly in the snow, enduring the little polar bear's paws that kept hitting its body, and even turned its head to lick the little bear's nose. The captain said excitedly, "Come and see, Yolashanda is hitting Aodicei." The team members who had just said that they were going back immediately gathered around in high spirits. Aodicei doesn't seem to be in pain at all. Is this considered domestic violence? No, it's acting coquettishly. The people who were still tangled in the relationship between the two suddenly felt that even if Aodicei fell in love with Yolashanda, so what? Even if Yolashanda was only 2.5 years old, even if they were both male polar bears, If they really had feelings for each other, this should be a relationship worthy of being blessed. Homosexuality was not uncommon in the animal kingdom. Currently, more than 1,500 animal species were known to have such behavior. The only surprising thing about Aodicei and Yelishanda was that before this, Aodicei had been raising Yelishanda like a child. No one expected that their relationship would become like this. Thinking that the rubbing clip might appear on CCTV, Xiaoqishi felt suffocated and almost fell on the snow. He was angry and couldn't help but vent his anger on Aodicei. After all, Aodicei was the culprit. He wanted to leave the camera as soon as possible, so he turned around and walked back. Obviously, he couldn't stay in this place any longer. He picked up the small yellow bucket that was about to be buried in the snow and left overnight. Aodicei didn't mind the little bear's willfulness. He followed the angry little bear closely, no matter where he wanted to go. The figures of the two polar bears gradually faded out of the camera. This was the 10th hour of the tracking. They would temporarily camp, sleep, and continue the tracking tomorrow. At the same time, they would report the latest news to the station. Aodicei rubbed Yelishanda's body in its agitated state. Yes, it was very surprising, but at the moment, they couldn't make any conclusions. They would continue to follow and see. The station's attitude was the same as Xiaoqishi's. He also felt that once or twice didn't mean anything. It was too rash to conclude that Aodicei had feelings for him just because of this. Who knew, maybe in a few days, Aodicei would meet a female polar bear that he liked. At that time, his conjecture would seem ridiculous. After all, this kind of thing was really rare and hard to believe. Therefore, Xiaoqishi felt that it was better to wait and see. There was no rush to run away from home. Instead, he should actively find a partner for Aodicei. If he could, he didn't want Aodicei to like him. Having a chance encounter with a female polar bear once a year was the right path for male polar bears. Liking someone of the same sex would have no future development and would not give birth to cubs. Xiaoqishi thought, fool Aodicei, there was no love in the Arctic. Wouldn't it be better to be a sea king polar bear? After leaving the human camera, they found a new place to sleep. They slept soundly. After the two polar bears woke up, they continued to move towards the snow mountain. Polar bears looking for a mate relied on smell to find the one they liked. This smell was not the stench of not bathing all year round, but the unique smell of hormones of every polar bear. They were also looking for female polar bears of the opposite sex. Just by smell, they could tell whether the male was strong or not, and whether he was suitable to be their mating partner. For example, Aodicei, who had just matured and experienced 2 sexual outbursts, the smell of his body had changed a little. If he had not attracted the attention of females before he matured, then now that he had the ability to reproduce, he had become the target of females' active pursuit. Female polar bears, who were about to enter estrus, smelled Aodicei from afar. They liked this polar bear who smelled very strong. They even abandoned their reservations and came looking for him. When the 3 polar bears met on a narrow path in the snow, the female polar bear, who had finally found the person she liked, was a little confused. She didn't seem to understand why there was a subadult little bear here. Xiaoqishi sniffed and quickly recognized that it was a female polar bear. That's right. Looking at the other party's small size, it was a good thing. It felt pretty good. The little bear caught up with Aodicei, who was looking straight ahead, and bumped his body with his butt. Ow, ow. Your wife has appeared. Why are you still burying your head in the sand? Hurry up and go soak. Aodicei didn't react at all. It seemed that he wasn't interested in the female polar bear. Male polar bears also had standards for choosing a mate. If they didn't meet the standards, they wouldn't get close. Xiaoqishi looked at the cold and heartless Aodicei, and then looked at the female polar bear who had taken the initiative to meet him from afar. He thought that she probably didn't like him. Well, there was nothing he could do. He could only say that in the animal world, there was no need for a woman to chase a man. The female polar bear didn't pester him. Seeing that Aodicei didn't seem to like her, she turned around and left. Not long after, A female polar bear that looked even taller bumped into them. Xiao Qixi compared her seriously and felt that this female polar bear was better than before. Not only was her fur white and cute, but her personality was also bolder. The other party, who had taken a fancy to Ao Daisai, walked over. This Xiao Xiaoxian was quite nervous. He immediately considered whether or not he should hide first. He looked around. It was bare. He had no choice but to put on Goldie, leaving only a gap to peek. How do the polar bears go on blind dates? He saw the cute female polar bear walk to a position 3 meters away from them. She lay down coquettishly and turned her belly to look at Ao Daisai. Xiao Qixi was dumbfounded. This sister is really awesome. I've learned something new. Who can withstand this? Little Bear's gaze turned to Ao Daisai. He thought that if he didn't go for such a good partner, would he wait for the next better one? How picky was Ao Daisai's taste? Besides, male polar bears could choose one to mate with. If Ao Daisai was willing, he could go on a date with this one and that one just now. Xiao Qixi was not the only one waiting for Ao Daisai to accept the female polar bear's goodwill. The camera team was also waiting. At this point, if Ao Daisai accepted this cute female polar bear, then the guess that he was a gay polar bear would not be valid. On the other hand, if he refused, then things would be a little serious. Xiao Qixi held her breath. At this moment, there was no prayer or hope. Anyway, no matter what Ao Daisai chose, it was not something he could control. Roar! Ao Daisai growled at Little Bear, who was standing still behind him, and urged him to keep up with his footsteps. Other than that, he did not look at the female polar bear lying in the snow. The entire camera team was silent. They were all quite surprised. Generally speaking, male polar bears were not so picky. Even if they did not like something, they would at least smell it before making a decision. Looking at Ao Daisai, he was not even interested in the smell of the opposite sex. No matter how you looked at it, he was a complete homosexual. At the same time, Xiao Qixi followed Ao Daisai's footsteps somewhat absent-mindedly. He did not like such a good condition. Then what did Ao Daisai like? The questions in her heart changed and finally became the most central question. Did Ao Daisai really like the little bear, who was still underage and of the same sex? As the saying goes, true knowledge comes from practice. If you want to know, can't you just ask him? Although polar bears could not communicate with words, they could communicate with their bodies. Little Bear already had a way to find the truth in his heart. However, as he walked, he looked at Ao Daisai's huge back and hesitated. Should he really do this? Well, what if he was caught by a camera? Little Bear looked around. He did not believe that there would be a camera on the road. Besides, the quality of the pictures taken in this kind of light was limited. It was still possible to be thick-skinned. The main thing was that some questions were stuck in one's heart. Without an answer, it would be very uncomfortable. As Xiao Qixi thought about it, a voice in her heart said, if Ao Daisai really likes you, then is being lustfully loved by a polar bear an acceptable result? This was indeed a problem. Xiao Qixi thought about it seriously. If there were no accidents, Ao Daisai would be the existence that tied her the most deeply in her career as a polar bear. After all, it should be impossible for him to meet a second, such a special polar bear. If she had to grow old with someone, Xiao Qixi would not refuse Ao Daisai. The premise was that Ao Daisai firmly chose him. It was love, not other feelings. It cannot be fickle, liking one person today and liking another tomorrow. If being a polar bear still hurt feelings, then it would be too ridiculous. Little Bear thought about it all the way until the third female polar bear who took the initiative to ask Ao Daisai for sex appeared. He did not notice it and directly bumped into Ao Daisai. Huh, really? There was a third one? Should it be said that Ao Daisai's charm was boundless? In such a short period of time, he had attracted 3 female polar bears from afar. The photography team hidden on a nearby snowy ridge also thought so. As expected of Ao Daisai, who was favored by fans all over the world, this polar bear was indeed favored by many female polar bears during the breeding season. The third admirer expressed her goodwill and looked forward to Ao Daisai's reaction. Little Bear also felt the same. He walked behind Ao Daisai with mixed feelings so that Ao Daisai could better appreciate the female polar bear. However, the iron-willed straight man Ao Daisai thought that Little Bear was afraid and that the female polar bear had scared the little bear. He was immediately unhappy. In the snowy night, no one saw Ao Daisai's fierce eyes, but everyone and animals heard Ao Daisai's angry roar. The target was the female polar bear. Everyone and animals were stunned. The first to react was the female polar bear, who had expressed her goodwill. Because it would be dangerous if she continued to stay, she immediately left. And the photography team nearby, even if they did not understand the bear's expression, could hear Ao Daisai's anger. Ao Daisai was really an unromantic and cold boy. He actually rejected 3 females who expressed their goodwill to him in a row. If they had not seen him rubbing against Yulashanda's body last night, everyone would have thought that he could not do that, okay? Now it seemed that he could, but the target was not a female polar bear, but a cute male polar bear. Thinking about it this way, Ao Daisai's taste was not bad. Yulashanda was indeed the cutest. Xiao Qishi was also stunned. Why did he chase her away again? He could still comfort himself with the previous 2, saying that it was a matter of probability. Of course, looking for a partner had to be compared, but Ao Daisai did not even give the other party a chance to interact with her. This was very unreasonable, okay? The idea of probing her previously appeared in Xiao Qishi's mind again. I'm going all out. I'm going all out. I'll give it a try. Little Bear took down the small bucket on his head. After all, this silly bucket would affect his performance. He recalled the second female polar bear's behavior. To be honest, even he was tempted at that time. No, he was still young. Little Bear ran in front of Ao Daisai, then threw the bucket away and lay on the ground, exposing his belly, tilting his head to look at Ao Daisai. Ao Daisai. I was stunned at that time. JP not only was Ao Daisai stunned, but the entire photography team was also stunned. Oh my god! Oh my god! The scene was difficult to deal with. The team members were screaming crazily in their hearts. Oh my god! Yulashanda and Ao Daisai are in love with each other. This is great. This kind of relationship is really good. Even if they are 2 male polar bears, they fell in love after meeting each other. This could not be said to not be a miracle. It transcended gender and age. Yulashanda was not even an adult yet, but she already knew how to use the adult female polar bear's way of expressing goodwill to the opposite sex, acting coquettishly to Ao Daisai. Who could stand this? People guessed that Ao Daisai, who received Little Bear's passionate and sincere confession, must be blissful at this moment. People were even more looking forward to Ao Daisai's reaction than the previous few times. This was the moment to verify the truth. Xiao Qishi and the photography team all thought so. Ao Daisai, who was in the spotlight, was stunned for a few seconds, then made a pleasant low sound from his throat, and the frequency sounded very happy. Next, he walked towards Little Bear, his huge body lying down to hug Little Bear, and they rolled in the snow. Xiao Qishi's face and nose were licked by Ao Daisai enthusiastically. At this time, Xiao Qishi could still comfort herself, playing. Ao Daisai was just playing with her. Usually he did this a lot. However, after rolling around twice, his fat legs pressed against Ao Daisai, who had appeared out of nowhere. This made his mentality collapse, and at the same time, he panicked, afraid that he would be crushed by Ao Daisai. Ao Daisai didn't care, as if he could bear Little Bear's fat legs. It was obvious that he was indeed very happy at this time, and it was completely different from the way he looked when he was roaring at the female polar bear just now. Xiao Qishi didn't know that this action wasn't just a simple gesture of goodwill, but a more accurate translation, it was a request for sex. If the male polar bear agreed, they could immediately find a place to date. This was obviously not a good place to be intimate. Ao Daisai wanted to get up immediately and continue to climb up the mountain with Little Bear. However, he couldn't bear to give up the opportunity to kiss and hug Little Bear. So he hugged Little Bear and played intimately in the snow for a long time. And the proof of his passionate love was always blooming in the snow for his beloved little bear. The ironclad truth was in front of him, and Little Bear finally admitted it. A.O. Daisai clearly loved him. The author has something to say. Cough. New topic on Monday. Everyone read the report yesterday. Not bad, not bad. Please continue to study. Chapter 37. Question. How should one react when a male polar bear falls in love with a male polar bear who is also a minor? Additional. This male polar bear is handsome, powerful, and very good at hunting belugas and seals. He has a calm and steady personality, domineering and fierce to the outside, and gentle and doting to the inside. His genes are excellent. Xiao Qixi did not know how to react. He was having a mental breakdown. Where was the great friendship, the most beautiful brotherhood in the Arctic Circle? It turned out that it was all an illusion. Under the cover of innocence, there was a strong and naked passion. Once it was exposed, the bear was caught off guard. Otis and the photography team were also caught off guard. They had been hit by Little Bear's ball. However, they were all very excited and could not bear it. There was still some time before spring, and A.O. Daisai had not prepared a suitable venue for affection. However, the little bear suddenly lay on the ground and begged for sex on the busy road, looking like he was about to do it. A.O. Daisai was stunned. A second later, A.O. Daisai ushered in an unprecedented happy mood. He immediately hugged the little bear and rolled around happily. At the same time, he inevitably showed a state of arousal. It scared the little bear. Obviously, Otis did not understand why Xiao Xiong was the one who took the initiative to ask him to have sex with her. However, Otis was afraid that Xiao Xiong would rub himself against him. However, Otis did not have to rub himself against Xiao Xiong every time. For example, in an unsuitable venue like today, A.O. Daisai did not care about his own strangeness, even if it was very uncomfortable to hold it in. Xiao Qixi did not stop until he was on all fours. With a face full of A.O. Daisai's saliva, he continued on his way. His mood wasn't a mess, as messy as the long hair between his toes. The little yellow bucket that Yelishanda had forgotten was fortunately remembered by A.O. Daisai. Otherwise, this time, it would have been lost in the vast snow and could never be found again. Finally, after such a long time, everyone's excited mood calmed down a little. As they watched A.O. Daisai and Yelishanda leave, all the members of the photography team heaved a sigh of relief. Ever since they knew that A.O. Daisai and Yelishanda were a couple, every interaction they saw was no longer pure friendship. It was as if they were watching a same-sex polar bear couple in spring. The more experienced male team members were still fine. They had worked for many years and were used to seeing animals doing all kinds of intimate actions. However, the more shy female team members, no matter how many times they saw it, they would still blush and their hearts would beat faster. This time, the captain unexpectedly said, "Even this combination makes me blush." A.O. Daisai really knows how to play. Yes, yes, everyone nodded in agreement. After watching the beautiful scene in the snow, everyone found their professionalism and took out their recording devices. According to their own understanding, they immediately recorded what they saw and thought. It would be too late to record some details later. There was no signal in the no man's land in the Arctic. People here could communicate with the outside world through radio. An unexpected scene had just happened here. The team members who witnessed the relationship between the two male polar bears couldn't help but share what they saw with their colleagues. As the forum PO who first paid attention to the two polar bears, he was a little confused when he received the news. He didn't quite believe the news that the professor shared with him. It's true. The news just came from the front line. The professor said, "Several pairs of eyes are watching. It can't be wrong, unless they collectively played a joke on us." That was impossible. His colleagues were all very professional elites in their field. How could they joke about such an important matter? Anyway, they're filming, aren't they? The professor shrugged and said, "We'll know when they come back." That made sense. The PO owner took some time to digest the news. After thinking about it, he decided to update the recent situation of the two polar bears on the forum so that everyone wouldn't worry. The moment the post was posted, the PO owner actually hesitated. The reason was simple. There were still some voices against homosexuality in this world. This was an objective fact. He was very worried that announcing that the two polar bears were gay would cause the two little cuties to be slandered from the outside world. What's more, Yolashanda was still underage. When the time came, the party that would be condemned more would undoubtedly be Ao Daisai. Yolashanda's fans were all over the world. They were fanatical, tough, and very protective. But then the PO owner thought, should Ao Daisai and Yolashanda's right to receive blessings just because of these few voices of opposition? So the PO owner decided to publish this news. Hashtag news from the spring photography team. Ao Daisai and Yolashanda like each other. There are a couple hashtags in order to avoid being questioned. The PO owner wrote a lot of explanations. I know that everyone may not be able to accept it for a while and is very suspicious of the authenticity of this news, but I promise that it's true. As for the pictures, I haven't sent them back yet. I'll definitely post them when I get them later. The following were the replies from the forum members. It seemed to be a little different from what he had imagined. Have we finally been found out? Eunuch, have you made it public? QQAO Daisai and Yolashanda. I'm sorry. I didn't leak your relationship. This secret can't be hidden anymore. Funny. Can you guys be more serious? I hope to see shocked and doubtful voices in the comments later. Then I'll cosplay for a while. Cough, Heavenly Duck. Ao Daisai and Yolashanda are actually a couple? How can they be a couple? They are clearly two male polar bears. One of them is still underage. Ao Daisai is too bad. I'll cosplay too. Ao Daisai is too bad. I didn't expect him to catch seals and feed Yolashanda every day. He fed Yolashanda until she was white and chubby. He spoiled her until she was delicate, just so that he could lick Yolashanda's legs for the rest of his life. What a bad bear. Ha 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 ha. Back to the topic. I'm not surprised. Funny. The smart me has already figured out how their relationship was discovered by the photographer. All right, those who can stay in this forum are not noobs. Everyone knows that gays run rampant in the animal world. I'm so excited. As expected of the animal world, reproduction is instinct. Gay friends are true love. Congratulations. The title has finally solved the puzzle in my heart for a long time. This way, the logic is self-consistent. Very good, very good. Spring is here. Ao Daisai and Yolashanda's relationship is finally exposed. Congratulations to them. P.S. I'm not surprised at all. What did I say? Laugh/cute Yolashanda. Do you know now? There's no free seal in the world. Every bite has to be returned. No way. It seems like you guys know all about it. The slow-witted me just felt that they were too boring as companions. If it's love, then everything has a reasonable explanation. I'm looking forward to the future development of this relationship. I've always watched Otis dote on Alisanda to the bone. He took care of Alisanda from the age of 1 to 2. Even during the summer, he endured the heat and hunted whales under the scorching sun. I knew how much he loved Alisanda, but I never thought that Alisanda would accept this relationship. Seeing how they like each other, I have a question. Does the 2.5-year-old Yolashanda really know what love is? Is it possible that Ao Daisai forced Yolashanda? It shouldn't be possible. Ao Daisai will grant Yolashanda's request. Isn't everyone clear? Don't doubt Ao Daisai's love for the little bear. If the little bear acts cute, Ao Daisai can even give up his life, okay? I'm laughing while scrolling through the comments. I actually saw someone doubting Ao Daisai's feelings. I think you've never been loved so deeply before, right? And I haven't either. Sob. Spring is coming. All the single ladies are very envious of Yolashanda. Ao Daisai really dotes on her. The owner scrolled through the comments, but he didn't see a single comment that slandered this bear love, except for a few comments that criticized Ao Daisai for being too impatient. Most of the comments were blessings and envious. He could understand the blessings and envy, but what was the point of strongly requesting the country to assign Ao Daisai as a boyfriend? There were also many people who didn't care about the fact that Ao Daisai had taken Yolashanda because he was handsome, strong, and doted on. After all, if another polar bear was with Yolashanda, they might not agree more. This news was spread to the outside world and caused a hurricane that was comparable to the biggest snowstorm in the Arctic during winter. First of all, there were those who sided with brotherhood and friendship. What? Two male polar bears announced their relationship in front of their eyes. Their feelings were very complicated, and many people expressed that their hearts were a little shocked. However, it was still acceptable to transition from this foundation to love. Respecting the choice of individuals was the most basic quality. Those who sided with father-son relationship were not just a little shocked, but even more seriously because this group of people was usually older and more conservative in their views. Father-son relationship transitioning to love. How ridiculous. Their posts were all condemning the bastard Ao Daisai and expressing their love for Yolashanda. Of course, there was also a group of people who firmly believed from the beginning that there was love between the two polar bears, but they didn't expect that on the eve of spring, Ao Daisai and Yolashanda would announce their relationship. Other than screaming, there was no way to express the excitement in their hearts. Speaking of which, there was a very special ranking on the internet called the most desperate couple you've ever seen. The leaders of various countries were directly on the list. But this wasn't a desperate couple. At least they had a lot of material to admire. Some lifeless objects were also on the list. In fact, it was still okay. They could be manually created to be in the same space, and candies could still be knocked. The most desperate couple. Finally, someone nominated those beautiful and fierce handsome guys in nature. The strong and domineering type, like the polar bear in the snow. The handsome and evil type, like the leopard in the grassland, and the cold and charming type, like the snow wolf in the Bear Mountains. There was everything. Being a fierce couple with these animals in nature was tantamount to personally sending oneself to a dead end. Even if the sea turned into mulberry fields, it was impossible for it to become true. But unexpectedly, the fans who silently thought of the couple were caught off guard by a pair of polar bears coming out of the closet. They became official. This pair of polar bears was really a couple. Little Attack Ao Daisai was strong and handsome, and it was not an exaggeration to say that he was the animal version of a domineering CEO. Ao Daisai had always used one word to describe his little bear as a couple, and that was to spoil him. It was hard not to be excited. Little Bottom Yolashanda was young and delicate, and as a super good-looking polar bear with super white fur and a super cute personality, he had more fans around the world than his boyfriend by half. Many people directly said that because they liked Yolashanda, they liked Ao Daisai, who was obedient to Yolashanda. Now, this special relationship that happened in the Arctic was suddenly made public, and these people looked at Ao Daisai like a mother-in-law looking at her son-in-law. Ao Daisai, who was climbing the snow mountain in the North Pole, would never know that he had tens of millions of mothers-in-law overnight. There were no such strange things in his world. While the other polar bears were still looking for a partner on the ground, Ao Daisai had already led Little Bear to the top of the mountain. From the time they came ashore until now, they had not eaten. So Yolashanda, who had not eaten a meal, was now hungry. Forget that. He still had to climb the snow mountain. He expressed that he had endured fatigue that he should not have endured at his age. Originally, he would only climb the snow mountain 2.5 years later. At this point, when Ao Daisai led Xiao Qixi to climb the snow mountain, he already knew the meaning of climbing the snow mountain. He did not want to go and even lay on the ground and pretended to be dead. Every time this happened, Ao Daisai would stop and patiently wait for Little Bear to act shamelessly. Occasionally, he would touch him with his nose or lower his head to nudge Little Bear's body. He was urging him silently and gently. He hoped that Little Bear would get up and continue walking, but it was not a strong request. If Little Bear continued to act shamelessly, there was nothing he could do. Ow, ow, I'm hungry. Xiao Qixi felt wronged. While he was hungry, he still had to climb the mountain, and at the same time, he had to worry that Ao Daisai would XXO when he reached the top of the mountain. Ao Daisai responded softly, looking a little helpless. Then he looked around. They were already halfway up the mountain, and the surrounding area was barren. When spring came, the polar bears would stop eating. The desire to reproduce would make them forget their hunger for a while. Only Little Bear, who did not have the desire to reproduce, wanted to eat all the time. Ow, ow. Little Bear, who was afraid of reaching the top of the mountain, hugged Aodai's thick forearm. He hoped that they would not go up the mountain anymore. Go back to the ice, okay? Aodai blinked his eyes full of emotions. He did not agree, nor did he disagree, because he did not know how to speak. More importantly, the desire in his heart to take Little Bear to the top of the mountain was so strong that even if Little Bear acted coquettishly to him, he could not immediately give an answer. Perhaps Aodai was experiencing a brainstorm. Desire made him choose to move forward, but love made him want to obey Little Bear's wishes. Chapter 38. Day and night were just around the corner, and spring had already begun. The land that was usually not favored by polar bears was now bustling with activity. The snow at the foot of the mountain was raging. Of course, this was an exaggeration. In short, if they were not on a date, they were on their way up the mountain. It was rare to see polar bears like Aodai and Yolashanda, who had already occupied mountain. The light under the leeward cliff was rather dim, and the huge male polar bear used a strong body to encircle a white ball. It was another polar bear. He was younger, with a round and cute body and fluffy white fur. However, he was not considered a little bear. Regardless of age or size, it was no longer appropriate to continue using the nickname Little Bear to call Yolashanda. In terms of age, Yolashanda was already a subadult bear. He had reached the age where he could leave his mother and live alone. Just like Aodai back then, he was already independent at this age. Yolashanda, who was 2.5 years old, had developed very well. Even a 3-year-old male polar bear might not be as big as him. Aodai, who was raising Little Bear, did not seem to care about these problems. It was as if he had never thought of developing a relationship with Little Bear like how a mother would raise her cub. Whether Yolashanda was 2.5 years old or 3.5 years old, it was as if this huge monster had never taken it seriously. Perhaps that was what Aodai thought. Even if Little Bear was 10 years old, he would still be his little bear. He needed to be fed, hugged to sleep, and accompanied by his side all the time. After an unknown period of time, a glimmer of light rose from the horizon, finally bringing a touch of light to the land that had been dark for months. Of course, the sky would not be bright all of a sudden. Perhaps they would have to wait patiently. As they waited, it started to snow, and the sky became darker. Xiao Qishi woke up with a yawn. Hearing the sound of the wind and snow outside, he immediately felt that this location was really good. The wind and snow really did not blow in at all. With the Aodai warming him up, he didn't feel cold at all. He turned his head to look at Aodai. Aodai, who had been resting with her eyes closed, immediately opened her eyes and looked at him. Just like that, their eyes met. One of them looked sleepy and adorable, while the other looked deep and focused. Under the calm darkness, there was an undercurrent. There seemed to be something hidden very deeply. Xiao Qishi blinked his round eyes and was quite amazed. He rubbed Aodai's face and thought that if he didn't know Aodai, he might not have known that polar bears had a mysterious side. Simple, honest, and clumsy. It had nothing to do with Aodai. When Little Bear rubbed his chin, Aodai's eyes immediately lit up. He looked very happy. He had many ways to express his happiness.